Okay, everyone. I'm here with Computing the Soul. Talking today about, well, who else but Ye, the absolute madman in many ways of the word. The reason I wanted to do the stream today is, obviously the interview, but I just saw in the reactions of around the interview a lot of kind of like uncertainty about, well, what does this mean? There's people who are like, okay, this man just went so nuts, like he made Alex Jones look rational and like normal. So it's basically over for us. Like he made us all look like idiots, so on and so forth. And I kind of want to explain what Ye is, what Ye has always been, and the function he will serve, and why I say, which I do say, is that he's important for kind of like the revival of the West, which of course is only possible through Christ and through Christianity, and how he kind of plays into that. So with me today is CTS, who I will just say he came on very, very late. Actually, had someone else planned for this. He came in late. The other guy fell ill. CTS kind of jumped in for him. So he is not really prepared for the stream. So when he kind of like, when I would just start talking onto him, basically, don't think.
Can I just say CTS sounds like a brand of sofas?
That's true. But I will not be saying Computing the Soul. I always think CTS sounds like BTS, and that's the real like.
Just call me Elliot.
Okay, Elliot is perfect. Okay, so with me today will be Elliot, and he will kind of like play a supplementary role. If he's a bit more of a quiet part in this conversation, don't fault him. He came on very late. I just briefed him on what it's going to be about, but it's.
I am the sounding board. I am the rubber duck. Like my view on Kanye, like I'm kind of somewhere between he's like completely lost it and he's actually been deliberately sent to destabilize parts of the right wing. That's my view of it at the moment. I'm not sure which. I'm leaning more towards he's had a bit of an episode, but
Okay.
You've thought about this a lot more than I have, so
yes. I've also been kind of like watching him. So this is something else. So I have had kind of like this Kanye West relationship since I was about 11 and 12 years old, where my stepsisters kind of made, so we always gave each other nicknames, and those nicknames would evolve over time. And at some point, my nickname, which was derived from the German word for rabbit, they changed it into something that basically sounds like Kanye. And then they kind of called me Kanye for a while. And my dad, as a joke, bought me a Kanye West shirt when I was like 13 or something. And ever since then, I have kind of been like on the Kanye West train, like on and off listening to his music. Kind of like whenever he did like the thing back in the day where he rushed the stage with Taylor Swift and everything. I have always kind of defended him in all of these things to my schoolmates. So this is kind of like the ultimate evolution of that.
Being German as well, I can imagine that will be a bit awkward.
Well, okay. So the first thing, the central topic to understand what Kanye is, why he was successful, and why he's probably going to be successful in the future, and why he does the things that he does is the concept of liminality. And the most, let's say, known liminality has been to people back, so like in recent culture, basically, is with the short fashion trend of liminal spaces. So this is a trend from 2 years ago. I just like when I made this video, kind of checked when were like the videos uploaded on liminal spaces. This was between like 2 years ago and 1 year ago. It's a certain kind of design ethic of like these strange yet familiar looking places, like a rundown burger joint with has like these cheap like 80s 90s seats and everything. These like weirdly decked out like purple or light bluish rooms. On the right hand side here is another example of liminal spaces, which people very often like to bring up, which I find more aesthetic. It's kind of like an almost abandoned or abandoned gas station out in the wild in the dark. And this is always the idea of a strange yet familiar place. So it's basically a place where you're like, I've been there before, haven't I? When you kind of see it on the internet or something. But then you kind of realize, nah, I just have been kind of there in a place similar. And it very deeply plays into the uncanny valley effect. And this is why, especially the liminal space is often associated with being scary, with being uncanny. There was this game where you're chased by an SCP in these like yellow rooms. Do you know what I'm talking about, CTS?
No. I mean, I've
It was
got the
also
idea
like
of like a Slender Man, like a bit like Slender Man, but
it's a bit like
like
Slenderman, but it was like a newer one. I don't even know what the SCP was, but it's kind of like I think it was like Slenderman to children who are probably like 14 last year or something. But that also was a liminal space, that kind of like environment. So liminal spaces, uncanny, creepy, kind of like outside of civilization, timeless, and sort of yeah, just have a certain atmosphere to them in which you can kind of place a monster and it makes sense. Okay, somebody says, "Am I really forced? Chat looks empty." Yeah, it's you are first. Congratulations, mass creation podcasts. Okay, so with this we can get into the workings of liminality. So liminality is basically the effect that you have when you get to the margins of a structure, of a social structure, of even of the borders of a country. Like back in the day, these things used to work much better together. So nowadays, the border of Germany and the Netherlands, for example, is not really a liminal space, right? The border between countries like, I don't know, Yemen and Oman, this is more of a liminal space, probably. I haven't been there, but this is probably more of a liminal space. I actually I've been mostly in Europe in my life. I've been to the US once, I've been to China once. I think I have never really experienced a liminal border area, but they used to be like that.
I'd say
So
Northern Ireland might be a bit like that. I can see,
could be.
you're sort of describing a kind of a Borderlands kind of thing, aren't you? So maybe
Yes,
where they
yes.
speak that strange low German, along the border with the Netherlands. I've
Yeah,
forgotten what it's called, like the special dialect that's kind of like the middle point between Hochdeutsch and Dutch.
yeah. I don't know either. I know they speak a
Wales
certain.
maybe could be
Yeah.
like that. I mean, the Highlands, maybe not the Highlands in Scotland, but I'm just thinking of areas that are kind of so because you're basically describing a kind of not just in a political sense, but to use kind of an analogy, the I lost the term. I've forgotten it now. The
Okay.
street, the street, the sort of the boundary of acceptable political opinion. What's
Yes,
the term
it's the
again?
Overton window.
Overton window, yeah. Basically, the Overton window applied to everything. But you're on,
In a
like, you're
sense,
just sort
yes. In a sense, yes. It is. It is. So the thing is it's actually a very deeply ingrained kind of like emotional setting. So when we are inside, like in our homes, and there's like a cozy fire going on, and there's rain outside, we get a very good feeling, right? It's a very, very nice feeling to have, which is why everybody should get a fireplace because it's amazing. But the important part is that is kind of like the opposite of liminality because you're like maximally protected. Like outside there's basically the flood going on, but you're inside, you're nice, you're protected. You know that there's nothing going on that's going to harm you. Liminality is again being on these margins, right? And I really want to create this understanding because there is a certain character that associates with it. So if you understand the setting, you hopefully understand the character more.
there's, I think you've reminded me of something I read out of, Francis of Assisi is reported to have said this.
Okay.
So the question posed by the brother is, what is true joy? And this is how Saint Francis responds. It's apparently like at least like reliable enough that it found its way into this volume, which is on Saint Francis and St. Clair. And he goes, "What is then true joy? I return." So actually, I might as well read the whole passage because it sort of adds to what you're saying. So, Brother Leonard related in the same place that's the Portincula that one day at St. Mary, the Blessed St. Francis called Brother Leo and said, "Brother Leo, write." He answered, "I'm ready." "Write," Francis said, "what true joy is." A messenger comes and says that all the masters in Paris have come into the order. Write, this is not true joy. Or that all the prelates beyond the mountains have entered the order. This is in brackets. As well as the archbishops and bishops, or that the King of France and the King of England have entered into the order. Right, this is not true joy. Again, that my brothers have gone to the non-believers and converted all of them to the faith. Again, that I have so much grace from God that I heal the sick and perform many miracles. I tell you that true joy does not consist in any of these things. So Leo responds, or Francis responds on his own. What then is true joy? I return from Perugia and arrive here in the dead of the night. And it is wintertime, muddy and so cold that icicles are formed on the edges of my habit and keep striking my legs, and blood flows from such wounds. And all covered from mud and cold. I come to the gate, and after I have knocked and called for some time, a brother comes and asks, "Who are you?" I answer, "Brother Francis." And he says, "Go away. This is not a proper hour for going about. You may not come in." And when I insist, he answers, "Go away. You are a simple and a stupid person. We are so many, and we have no need of you. You are certainly not coming to us at this hour." And I stand again at the door and say, "For the love of God, take me in tonight." And he answers, "I will not. Go to the Croziers' place and ask there. I tell you this, if I had patience and did not become upset, there would be true joy in this, and true virtue and the salvation of the soul." It just seems to me, I was reminded of this because you described the wholesome fireplace, and I thought, well, what's the polar opposite of that? And I think that the whole consideration of St. Francis of Assisi there strikes me as almost hitting that liminality in a way.
This is so great because later we will get into liminal figures and liminal saints, and the number one example is St. Francis of Assisi. So, okay, let me give the workings of liminality. So you strip away all status and hierarchy due to ignorance or superiority. Right, so the superiority would be you leave the country. Let's say you're in I'm going to give like easy examples first. Let's say you're in a very small country, you know, like, I don't know, you just like a worthless like little holding in the HRE. And you leave that, and you're like the richest man in there, and you go to Hamburg, right? One of the biggest cities in the HRE. And suddenly all your status, all your being the richest, smartest, whatever in your small town is taken away. That would be an effect of liminality, right? Ignorance is the way more fun one. And that is basically, and you see this is very common tropes in comics and stuff like that. You have someone who leaves like their position is like a very high status. He goes somewhere else where they don't know his status. He wants to be treated the way he was, but they don't understand why they should treat him that way. And here's the first kind of like figure of liminality is someone like Diogenes, right? Because when Alexander goes before Diogenes, Diogenes doesn't treat Alexander as an emperor. He treats him just as a person, basically, because Diogenes is a liminal figure. And in him, this hierarchy that normally exists within society breaks down, right? So you have this general feeling of nakedness. And there you have another liminal figure in the emperor's new clothes, right? Very, very common version of liminality is, in this case, the liminal figure it's usually either male or a child. And even if it's a child, usually a male child. Because the liminal figure always is a transgressive figure. It's outside of society. It transgresses the bounds of society. So it is male, right? So the basic distinction between femininity and masculinity is transgression versus reception, right? Or transgression versus exclusion. And in this, again, the child in the Emperor's New Clothes becomes the liminal figure, because it kind of like points at the emperor and says, the emperor has no clothes. And in this case, you see the revival of a society that is living under a collectively enabled lie through a liminal figure, right? And that is the next working of liminality. It's the reshuffling of social structure. And this is both the case for liminal spaces and liminal figures. Again, liminal figure, like for example in the child in the Emperor's New Clothes, liminal places is something like the wandering in the desert, right? There's, even though Moses stays kind of the leader of the tribes of Israel, there still is a lot of reshuffling going on in these social structures. Even more contemporary, something like we even have more, let's say, information about, is just what happened when Europeans settled other parts of the world. I mean, that is how the United States came to be, right? It's a reshuffling of the social structure by entering a liminal space. And so liminality is always either funny or scary. And it's often both from different perspectives. So the liminal space, as I just introduced it, as it has been perceived recently, is just an exclusively scary space. But for example, humor, jokes, stuff like that also like use liminality, right? To be funny. When you are engaged in romance, it always has a liminality aspect to it, where the male has this like certain range of transgression against the female, which he kind of like plays up to a certain degree to advance the romance, basically. So in all of these things, you have this this presence of liminality, and a perfect symbol that has developed in the West and has been very present in the West for the last, I would say, 50 to 100 years is the symbol of the clown, because in how we treat it nowadays, it also gives the perfect two sides of liminality. On the one hand, clowns are supposed to be funny, but recently clowns have much more commonly become an idea of horror, an idea of anarchy, an idea, so Joker, It, stuff like that, where you have kind of like the scary, chaotic, monstrous clown. And both of these are figures of liminality, right? So this is kind of like how liminality functions. Now let's first get deeper into the characters of liminality in fiction and mythology to kind of understand what their use is, why it is needed, and then we will get slowly to what Ye is, what Ye does, and maybe the effects Ye will have. So a very well-written character of liminality is Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. He is introduced at the margins of the Hobbit village. So once our four main characters leave the village and go somewhere where they've never been before, and they go to a village that's kind of like inhabited by hobbits and humans, this is where they meet Aragorn. And he, of course, so he is at the edge of the world. He is this man who is used to the edge of the world, and from him we learn later that he is actually the king, the great king in exile. And this is also a version of liminality where it's this idea of exile and what is called, so liminality is it's an anthropological term, and what also developed in tandem with it, what people know much more, is the idea of rite of passage. And effectively, Aragorn is currently undergoing his rite of passage. He is entering a stage of liminality, and he will return from that. He will come back from that and take the reins over the entire society. And that is effectively his, let's say, his second step, right? A figure that is very, very, very extensively covering liminality is the figure of Hermes and Mercury from Greek and Roman myth, and also especially in how he developed in European culture since then, especially since the Renaissance period. So if you go through Europe today, the most common, and you look at old architecture, like 17th, 18th, 19th century stuff, the most common figure you will find, the most common religious figure you will find adorned on houses especially in like Eastern Europe and the former Protestant areas, is not Christ, is not Mary, it's Hermes/Mercury. And he, in his tradition, is a combination of a lot of liminal factors. So he is the patron of merchants who transgress beyond the boundaries of the city, traditionally used to be the bringer of news, right? They, for example, also played a huge role actually in spreading early Christianity. It was largely spread by merchants who kind of carried news back and forth, right? They were the bringer of news. They were so there's also again Hermes, right, the bringer of news, which is the other thing he is. He is for communications, because in communications you enter into the margins with every person with whom you communicate for the first time. He is a patron of what is it? Of later alchemy, and effectively like this idea of an idealistic scientific pursuit, we can say, which again also is a journey into the margins. And I forget the last one. It's merchants. It's couriers. There's one as well, but I'm not thinking about it right now. Whatever. He brings about like all of these different aspects of liminality in that sense. Odin is one that I find funny because the Norse people basically like majorly disrespected their own like chief god, because Odin, or the German name Wotan, is actually the Proto-Indo-European word for insanity. And he is a mercurial figure as well. He his entire like journey and getting the info basically about Ragnarok, and hanging from the tree, achieving enlightenment, coming back into society to prepare it for Ragnarok. All of that is a journey into liminality, right? And coupled with that, something that is also important about the liminal figure. That is what I forgot about Mercury. Mercury is a trickster god. And Odin is also technically a trickster god, not because he is a trickster, but again, because he is associated with insanity. And that association is also something that is important for the liminal figure. And we will later get into sanity and insanity to kind of like get that perspective as well. Then we have Pan. I also picked him because of the insanity link. Of course, Pan associated with music, which is so there's basically like two types of music which you can be associated with in that kind of like worldview which the Greeks had, and it's basically like nice music like harp and lyre music, and then there's like rhythmic kind of dance music. Nowadays, you would make maybe like a differentiation between what you play at a club and what you play at an orchestra, right? And Pan would basically be the kind of music that you play at a club, which again is all about it's all about losing control, that kind of stuff. And he also, of course, is associated with panic, which, as we get into, is a liminal state. And delirium, insanity generally, is a liminal state. And the last character, somebody already kind of dissed me for it in the comments, is Monkey D. Luffy from One Piece. And One Piece is a show that I will definitely cover, or that I want to cover. I hope that the author of One Piece actually is able to pull this story off, because what One Piece really is, it's a giant treatise on liminality. And it brings on a lot of, so it creates a liminal character, Luffy, who is the main character, who wants to become basically the king over the sea, which is the pirate king. And he enters into a world that is controlled by a world government. So it's basically a world under lockdown where liminality is not possible. And he assembles all the liminal characters, which is why every character he assembles into his crew always has the sad backstory and always is an outsider in some sense, either when he finds them or in the backstory or whatever. He assembles them into their crew, and he kind of makes a journey that will lead to the revival of the world. So the journey is basically their rite of passage, and they will revive the world, and they will bring what is effectively magic back into the world. They will make the world magical and nice again. That's kind of like the general gist behind One Piece. And in it picks out very good themes and plays on liminality that are also necessary to understand, let's say, the success or the failure of a liminal pursuit. So one of the biggest themes in One Piece is smiling. For example, all of the Clan of D, which are basically like we could call them the liminal family. They're called the natural enemies of the gods being kind of like self-appointed people who are themselves also kind of bad liminal figures because they remove themselves from the society to such a degree that they don't even want to breathe the same air as the people around them. But the Clan of D, which our main character belongs to, they all die smiling, right? They're all about having fun. So he later kind of evolves into what is, he basically has a scene of apotheosis where he becomes the sun god Nika, which is a figure that is introduced into the story later. And the entire idea, again, behind that sun god is that he comes to the poor and the downtrodden, and he cheers them up. He makes them smile. And another way, but there's also kind of like this bad place on the theme. But the last one I just want to give here is that the will he follows. So he has this man who basically already did the entire journey, and he kind of like follows him step by step by step. He follows in his footsteps. And we know that let's say the final state, the thing that will revive the world basically is on an island, and it's very likely a story, and it's a laugh tale. So all we know is that when the first guy read it, he just laughed maniacally. So it's basically a joke. The entire world will get saved through jokes, through silliness, through laughter, in a sense, right? And then there's like the other aspects of it, so friendship and loyalty and so on and so forth, which we have to, let's say, concern ourselves with less in this one. But especially the idea on being silly, on having good humor, on being able to laugh and have a good time and not losing your wits about you in that sense is something that's very important for me to mention here. Again, think of the interview, think of Netanyahu, and you'll know what I'm talking about, right? And someone in chat says the One Piece is indeed real, and yes, the One Piece is real. Okay.
So just to sort of get this down.
Yeah.
So it strikes me that both Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader are also liminal figures in different ways.
Yes, both of them.
Yeah.
Luke Skywalker, of course, in that he grows up in the desert, kind of like outside of society. He's brought into society not understanding it, learning it, which is very, very, very common in storytelling, that the main character is a liminal figure precisely for this reason. So whenever there's a lot of like focus on world building, the main character is usually liminal, so we can learn the world with them, right? And the Darth Vader is liminal, again, also in the way in which he's removed from everyone, right? There's like a suit between him and everyone. There's a mask on him, which is a sign of liminality. Again, also, I chose Ye in a mask for the profile picture on the stream for that reason, right? Because the mask is an emblem of liminality, and maybe we can touch on that here, because Ye, when he was asked about wearing a mask by Jones on the stream, he kind of gave this weird answer. And the first thing I want to make clear is that Ye must have, there's no real other way to explain his behavior. He must have an ingrained emotional, very strong understanding of liminality, because the mask is a very, very good and obvious liminal choice. And the way he describes it is also not off. He just describes it, let's say, in his own vocabulary and let's say in the ways in which he describes it. But it very obviously also is an emblem of liminality. So here we kind of like look at liminality at its absolute best, and that of course is Christ. Right, so Christ is a liminal figure. He has very many liminal aspects to him, especially in the Gospels. Right, and there's a bit of a of a conundrum even in that he is probably more liminal in the Gospels in many ways than he should be in our everyday lives. Right, because now that he has incarnated, he should be very immediate. Even though he's still, and that is the interesting thing about him, that is opposing Christianity to paganism is, and this is the last point on the slide, is Christ is at the same time a liminal and a central figure, in that you are in his kingdom, but the journey you make outside of it is towards him, effectively.
It's not even that. I mean, that's part of it, but I think the bigger thing I got from reading the Gospels is that he's like so traditional. He's more traditional than the Pharisees.
Yes.
It's like you can see, or like the you know what they call the Beatitudes. Like a lot of them are just ripped from the old, like whole cloth from the Old Testament. And Jesus is basically, when the Pharisees come up to him and like complain about something, he's just like yes, and then like triples down and like accuses them of not being traditional enough.
Yes.
He is. Oh, go ahead.
There is, so to kind of explain this, of course, for almost everything Christ does, is there is like a certain like human instinct to it, and you see the correct reply to it bear out in like a false context very often in today's society. And what this is the insistence by especially let's say affluent middle class white women to assign a higher sort of wisdom to children, animals, and or remote cultures. So like that in like some Indian tribe somewhere, children and animals. This is the whole like, oh, my child just said, why can't we have like X and Y economic policy for the Middle East, which the kid totally said, right? The play on this is all that the liminal figure in its perfection, and Christ obviously is the liminal figure in its perfection, is at the same time so removed from the world that he basically has perfect innocence and naivete in his questions, but also so learned that he is able to perfectly judge everything that comes to him. Right? So he is at the same time absolutely childish and also absolutely superior and able to judge. Because again, the liminal figure, when you approach it, another version of the liminal figure is kind of the master, the wise man outside of society. The liminal figure, as you approach it, is a judge of you, right? And that is also something that plays out. So there's a sort of search for liminality, which we will get to later, the search for liminality in contemporary culture, because it has lost Christ as an also liminal figure, which supplants with children, which supplants with foreigners, which supplants with people who are like immigrants, basically, which is another take on foreigners. But there's also this idea of, so there's this idea of, oh, immigrants need to come into this country to basically culturally enrich us. This is a striving for liminality. There's also what some people call the Miyagi complex, where it's like, oh, the spirituality in, I don't know, Taiwan or India or whatever is so superior to ours and we need to learn from them, which is a desire for liminality. All of these things are sort of a hope to return liminality to a society which has lost it. Okay, so just picking up other liminal aspects of Christ, or did you want to say something, Elliot?
I was just thinking, it seems like almost part of a root cause for idolatry in a way. You know, they forsake God and then they follow after false gods.
It's very funny that
must be a draw.
Yeah, it's very funny that you mentioned that, because one of the people who was very kind of like central to researching liminality is a man who later converted to Catholicism. He converted not just over this, but over his anthropological studies in general. Victor Turner is his name. And Victor Turner studied basically religiosity all over the world. And with that insight, he later converted to Catholicism. And one of the big things that led to that, one of the big changes in his mind was, when Westerners think about religion, they very often, and this is something that plagues the right wing to no end, they very often think of religion as sort of an enabling social technology that provides a certain lifestyle, right? Or a certain social contract, or a certain amount of social capital to a group. So the basic idea is, we figured out Christianity. Game theoretically, the optimal strategy for a social group is actually to turn the other cheek upon aggression, because that reduces the range of error for like accidentally offending one another, which is definitely not what turning the other cheek. It's a Peterson take of religion. Someone
Like it's the Edward Duttonization of religion.
Yeah. And so Victor Turner went into the world and he saw that like everyone around the globe wasn't doing this. Like the societies went great, they went badly. Like it did have something to do with religion. Like, of course, religion plays into everything, right? Into your social, into your mental health, into your societal, like into your social, social capital, whatever. But it's not really the essence of religion. And what he saw, what people were mainly concerned with, was the experience and proper interactions with liminal figures. And that is exactly how you say how idolatry also comes about. If you are unable to have liminality in the correct way, you will substitute it with something else. This is why people put out food, like in Iceland, put out like skyr for the skyr gobbler gnome who comes at Christmas and gobbles all your skyr away, because it is an easier, more comfortable way of engaging and having, let's say, the mental and the psychological awareness of liminality than it would be to actually engage with liminality in a Christian sense. And the reason for that, and that's the point I wanted to make in the beginning but skipped, is in most pagan traditions, most of the time, what liminality is something that is only ever outside of your comfort zone, basically. So you can create a zone of comfort, which is like your city or whatever, and liminality starts where you want it to start. So you have the choice of transgressing out of your Garden of Eden, basically, and engaging with liminality. It doesn't come to you. In Christianity, that is not the case. Christ always is a liminal figure that's very present with you. And he always kind of like is there. This is why people like think of Christianity sometimes as so judgmental. But then also Satan is another liminal figure. And he also is always present. This is something that everyone who watched the Ye interview has to give him props on. Not only did he identify Satan as the ultimate enemy, but he very clearly made it clear that Satan is always closer to you than you think where you can see him. Because you can very easily say, and he said this in the interview, Balenciaga is satanic, right? Because they air what is basically like child pornography in their clip. That guy over there is satanic, right? But then the next thing he says, and which of course he takes straight from the gospel, is, well, what about you? You're on Instagram, you watch pornography, so on and so forth, right? And that is definitely like, this is the perfect message. This is the correct way to interpret Christianity, right? Both Satan and Christ are inside and outside of the realms which you traverse on your earthly life. You have to fight with Satan in your immediate self and in your immediate surroundings and in the everyday interactions you have with people around you. You're not born into Hobbit village, right? Where everything is fine and you can just like hang out and like everybody's good. And maybe out there somewhere is Mordor, where the orcs live, if you want to go on the journey, right? The journey is coming to you, and it's like starts with you and it's around you everywhere. But also Christ is with you. He's with you here, and he's with you all the way in Mordor, right? And of course,
in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there is only war.
Exactly.
Like, literally. But you have Space Marines, like literally, like
basically,
like that's precisely what, I mean. Space Marines are like a modern kind of take on that liminal figure, because if you look at their portraying in media, and they're always like these kind of stout, like strong men with like hefty English accents, like fighting along, like very received pronunciation English accents, like just beating things up. Like it's kind of like I think that the British kind of have a liminal aspect with American culture as well, because if you notice, right, you've got the Beatles come in, you've got all these bands coming over from Britain and transforming American culture. And there's this view that Americans have, for some reason, that because of our accent, we're somehow more intelligent than them. Yeah. Like it kind of, there's the kind of like the slightly different thing.
The truth, of course, being that it's not because of your accents, it's just because American education is so bad.
You think the British education is good? Okay.
Fair enough. Yeah. As long as it doesn't
just lock me in a room. They should have just locked me in a room with a bunch of books.
Yeah. Oh man, no, the German education also. I work as a tutor part-time, and like the degree to which people like I tutor maths, and the degree to which people like fundamentally don't understand maths, right, is like all of school mathematics is the simplest stuff ever. You just have to like explain it correctly to people once, and they usually start getting it. It's ridiculous. And the thing you need to understand, mathematics is the first thing they teach you in uni, which is set theory. Because if you have that conception of mathematics, everything is easy to you. Okay, but let's go back to Christ here. Very important again. Christ is a transgressor against the social etiquette of his time, right? When he does things on the Sabbath, stuff like that. And it's exactly as you say, it's not that he is a transgressor against laws. It's actually that the laws are transgressors against him. And he just does the correct thing. He does the real thing. He does, of course, the godly thing. And in doing these things, he is transgressing against false laws. And that, of course, also is always a giant dynamic. It's kind of like, which laws are true, which laws are false, right? What should we or do we have to transgress again, and what do we have to obey? And the only one who gives that perspective, the only one who can make us not go insane in liminality, and we will get onto that topic later again, is Christ. It is not possible without him. He is the only, if you read the Gospels, if you read the Sermon on the Mount, if you read where he talks, the Sermon on the Mount is about liminality. And this is also where like turning the other cheek comes from. It's preached at the Sermon of the Mount. And all of these, of course, there's more themes to it because, well, when Christ speaks, he just like, there's like a million themes going on in every passage. But a big theme is liminality, because what you are called to when you turn the other cheek and when you do the other more important thing is that if somebody takes half your coat, you give him the other half, right? the reason you do that is because if he takes half your coat, he's probably cold, right? So you give him the other half so that he definitely isn't cold anymore. And the question that people always have is when they read these passages is, how do I make sure that I'm just not getting completely exploited in this? And the answer again is Christ, and it's in this sense. When somebody steals your coat out of envy because your coat is nice or something, because they want to pawn it off, or out of any kind of lower motive, not only are they harming you, they are harming themselves. And in that sense, it is good for them, for you to defend your belongings against them. Whilst if you own a fruit shop and somebody steals fruit because they're hungry, it's the good thing for you to let them steal your food. So this is there's of course there's they say there's other aspects as well. So you're not just obligated to yourself and the other party, but you might also be obligated to a third party. So for example, if the coat you wear, the other person might be in some sense of need of them, but the coat is a gift. And let's say you have to, there's of course, let's say other factors that play into it. But the very basic thing is looking at what the other person, what the need of the other person is here, just as much as looking at your own need, which is what he kind of also preaches for later, where he says, even the sinners give when they know that they get in return, right? It's all about putting the need of the other first. This is a very high level also of liminality, because you exit your own being and you engage in the outside perspective of the situation, and you take the perspective and you look into it. Then also in the same Sermon of the Mount, he warns people of being laughed at for following him and for preaching his gospel. And again, of course, peak liminality, right? You have to take that. You have to be willing and able to go to the margins of society, to be pushed to the margins of society by people who don't want to hear you, right? Who say, oh, this is all just whack, or, oh, we don't really need to take it so literally, or whatever, right? So all of these are ways of liminality. And then the last one I also want to talk about, just from a symbolic perspective, is the blood of Christ. Because the blood of Christ is, let's say, the most poignant symbol of his passion when it comes to liminality. Because it is the blood of Christ, which often nowadays is omitted from the imagery, which is a huge error in imagery, by the way. Fulton Sheen talks about this very, very well, where he kind of talks about Christ in the East, Christ in the West, where he says in the East, they basically have a cross without Christ, and it's all like punishment and law, but there's no forgiveness in it. And in the West, we have Christ without a cross, a bloodless Christ, who is a nice humanitarian with no punch behind him and no teeth. And which is, of course, something we still suffer from to this day. And again, which is where Ye comes into later, right? And
yeah, that's what really bugs me about The Chosen. Have any of you watched The Chosen?
I have,
yeah. yeah, like there are a couple of problems with it, but that's one of the things that really bugs me about Jesus in that he's too nice.
That is true.
He doesn't like it really bugs me, and he's like just joking around, and it's like, no, that's not the Jesus at least I read in the Gospels. The Jesus I read in the Gospels was extremely stoic.
You have to take into account we're just now getting to the Sermon on the Mount on the Chosen. So all the times when Christ actually gets upset are still to come. So
dude, like he literally goes through it with Matthew, and Matthew helps him word it. It's ridiculous.
That is weird. Yeah, I mean,
it's ridiculous.
And I don't want to shoot down The Chosen too much. I personally like The Chosen.
Oh, it makes me like parts of it. Like it's all right. Like, but parts of it make me cringe. Like the way they depict John the Baptist as like this kind of like weird revolutionary type, where he's just really rude to the Pharisee and like literally retorts the words of Judas to Nicodemus in one scene. Like,
Yeah. I mean,
it's grim. I don't like a lot of it.
yeah, I don't know. I don't want to talk about The Chosen here. I definitely see the
Yeah, it just occurred to me. Like, I
yeah.
just thought I'd bring it up.
Okay, so
Jesus isn't
anyway, I
hard
was
enough.
gonna, yeah, the blood of Christ. So it's a liminal effect because someone says next slide. Yeah, okay, sorry. It's a liminal aspect, right? It is what the blood of Christ is what drenches into the wood of the cross and is what sanctifies the cross. This is very important. It's also something we need to see. It is something that is unsightly. It is something that is ugly. It is something that needs to be inside of churches because we need to be confronted with it to exactly push Christianity out of being a therapeutic religion, right? Because it's a joke for so many people, and then when they hit hard times, so people usually like, like I'm Christian enough, basically. Then they hit hard times and they think of Christianity as such a like nice, surrounding Christmassy and Eastery celebration religion that they have no concept of resorting to it when it really counts, and also no concept, even if they do, they kind of just they start praying maybe, and they're maybe like, oh God, I really need you right now, and like have no idea of following the commandments that they are given by Christ. Okay, but now
Yeah,
let's
it's
get to
like
the
less Francis of Assisi and more Vicar of Dibley.
yeah. Okay, so
Have you heard of the Vicar of Dibley? It's like this show about a
no.
woman priest in the Anglican Church, and it's like a comedy. You know, the Anglican Church really sums up exactly that kind of, at least in my perception, this incredibly cringe kind of middle class, kind of soft, cucumber sandwich Christianity. Right? I think G.K.
Yeah.
Chesterton talks about it as well. Like Anglicanism, I mean, at least in the UK, is it reminds me of exactly that. They have their messy church thing. That's something that should be burnt to the ground. That's like that kind of that reminds me very much of that. But yeah, I'm sort of rambling. But yeah.
Yeah. No, but Anglicanism, and we see what the fruits of that is, right? Like Anglicanism is like most Anglicans believe that their church will fracture in like a few years or something. Right. So if you kind of double down, or like if you commit to that sort of like feel nice therapeutic religion, you're just not it's just not going to happen. Like
They're too frightened to tell people, like they're too frightened to say, some of them anyway, that like acting on homosexuality is a mortal sin. That's the problem with them. They're afraid of that because, like, I don't know, like secular liberals will hate them or something.
And you can be more diplomatic with that, right? Like somebody who I think often gets accused of a weak Christianity, but whom I would only accuse of being very shrewd and very cunning is Bishop Barron, right? Because whenever he is confronted on these things, he never makes an excuse. He never goes out. He just kind of like reshifts the conversation. He says something like when he's confronted about homosexuality, oh, there's nothing wrong with very good, chaste friendships, right? With a very strong like friendship between two men, right? Or when he's confronted about women priests, he says, oh, the best way to kind of like getting into heaven is to become a saint. And if you really want to live in holiness, you have to live like a saint, right? It's always like these low-key shoot-downs. That is okay, right? You don't have to be like yay. Basically, you don't have to be there, be incredibly transgressive to everyone's faces and just say things, right? You can be diplomatic about it. You don't have to be, bam, there you are. But you can't be like, you can't deny
Bishop Barron of the Taliban.
Yeah. Okay, so and this is kind of liminality in Christianity. So all saints are necessarily liminal to some degree. This is, of course, with being from outside the world. Most people are worldly, right? So worldly. Do you want to give a short, maybe so I can include you a bit more, a bit of a rundown on worldliness?
So being of the world is those who really put things beyond God first. So it's a kind of idolatry, but it varies out. So there's the three temptations that St. John of the cross mentions, there's the world, the flesh, and the devil. The flesh being, overeating, too much sex, things like that. The devil being anger and envy and stuff like that. And then the world is basically just like being socially pressured. I mean, I'm not sure. I can't recall exactly what he said. But the world is often things like just going with the flow.
Yes.
The picket fence, the white picket fence, the 2.5 kids, that kind of thing. Right?
Yes.
Like that's like that kind of fundamentally unsatisfying, disgusting, intuitively disgusting way of living that just
Yes.
follows the conventions of a time, and there's no life in it. There's no creativity in it. It doesn't love God, because God fundamentally calls us to an extremely radical way of living. He tells you to sell everything. I mean, so that's spiritual counsel, right? He calls us to celibacy, to some extent. He calls us to maintaining a strict chastity, right? So it's this embrace of kind of like it's the easy way out. It's like a slow suicide, in a way.
Yes. It's the death by 1,000 paper cuts. Exactly. And most people commit to it because it's easy. Exactly. Right? It's the efficient way. It's the way that kind of like, if because, so it is not that you think that it's a sort of, let's say, optimal strategy for living, right? For example, when you toss your clothes on the ground, right? You're going to have to pick them up later, right? But at that moment, you don't care, right? So let's say you're changing, you're tossing just clothes on the ground. I could put them at least over the chair somewhere, right? But at that moment, you don't care, right? And it's basically this on a societal scale. And it's putting kind of like the, or not on a society, on a cosmic scale, I guess I would say. And it's putting these small things first, because in the end, there's just a lack of belief. And what belief is properly is the knowledge that the picture that you right now have of the world is incomplete, right? That is what proper Christian faith is that that you don't know everything about the world right now, basically. And we need this, we are called to this, we're called to build this for a very simple reason. And that is that if we enter into communion with God, he will always be beyond our comprehension. No matter, even if we get the beatific vision and everything, he will still be beyond our comprehension, even though he will also be infinitely comprehensible. So we will kind of, when we get the beatific vision, we will kind of know what he is, who he is, what we need to do, everything basically. He will still be something that we cannot consciously grasp. He will always be bigger than what we than we can grasp him. So we need to make ourselves able to have a view on him that extends, and again, this is liminality, right? That extends beyond the vision we have. So take the beatific vision. This is probably false, possibly heretical, but take the beatific vision as like a fractal, right? You can zoom in infinitely. You can look at it. You can zoom in infinitely. You will always see more, right? But when it's a fractal, there always is more, right? And so in that sense, faith prepares us to be able to engage with God in any sort of way, basically, right, in the afterlife. And that is why in our everyday life, we need to have this openness for things being, let's say, because if what we do when we are worldly is we do the immediate thing that comes to mind if everything were to stay the same and freeze in time, basically, right? That is what we do. And when we develop faith, we kind of transgress beyond that, right? So even an analogy would be, if you're looking for a job or if you're looking for a partner, you take the job or the partner, like the first one you that comes across you, which you're like, okay, this has serious downsides, but I just need a job right now. And you can't have the faith to hold out longer and say, okay, there's probably something better down the line, right? Maybe in the case of the job, you're starving. I'm probably giving away my kind of cosmopolitan, sheltered German lifestyle, but like in a broader sense, I think it's more like easier understandable with a partner. Right? It's like there's always going to be like you don't need to like settle for the first thing that comes across you, basically. So another liminal figure I want to also give an kind of to showcase is the priest. Right, priests are liminal figures. They are to some degree removed from the people, from the society. They are, in a sense, also in a constant rite of passage because they, of course, they can bless your home and so on and so forth. So they're also very present, but in their functionality, they're not a real member of a social structure the way other people are, or at least they are supposed to not be. So you are, you're married, you're with your wife and your children, you have other couples around you, you kind of like raise the children together and stuff like that, and you're all on equal footing. The priest is kind of a bit above that, and he is a more liminal figure that kind of like he doesn't have children. He is not part of like, he's not the Joneses and the Stewarts and the I don't know what are English last names.
Smith,
Yeah,
Edwards.
the Smith is, exactly. And he is one guy, right? He's not a family, he's one guy. And this gives him also, again, this liminal role. And of course, where he also assumes that liminal role maximally would be traditionally in the confessional, right? Where he's basically cut off from you and you don't see his face. And of course, in that case, to enable you to yourself be liminal, because when you talk about your own sins and the things you did wrong, you're very often very, very vulnerable. And that also is a liminal state, right? Okay, and yeah, again, I think we said all we have about liminality, so let's talk about Ye. And actually, the slide I had for this, liminality in contemporary society, is the one that broke. I guess it didn't even break. I probably didn't fill it out. I always copy paste my slides and then fill them in. And in this case, I guess I forgot to fill it in. So the things he says, so the first thing that people have to understand, and again, like watching the interview, and on the one hand, it's great for laughs, but also kind of give him a chance, I would say, and really see what he is saying. What Ye is primarily moved by, and the only way he's going to survive this, in maybe there's other way he comes out alive, but like the only way he's going to survive this in a more, let's say, in a broader manner, is through what he's doing. He's very, very Christ-centered in everything he does, right? So he is Christian to the degree of stupidity. And he himself accepts that his Christianity is very limited. He calls himself on stream a baby Christian. And he kind of like calls into question the degree to which he is, let's say, a proper Christian, right? And but he has a very, very, very sincere and massive belief in Christ, in the Gospels, and in what he reads, obviously reads in the Gospels. So he becomes, through this, a liminal figure in today's world. And there is a lot of things that happen when that happens. So first, let me give a bit of a background to everyone who's in play at the moment. So the people who love it the most, but even they are overwhelmed, is 4chan, because 4chan, of course, always has been a liminal community. It always wants to be a liminal community. It thinks that liminality is kind of like a superpower, which it is not. But 4chan is, it always has been a liminal community. Maybe it hasn't been for like a short while when like the internet historian made videos on it and like a lot of people went there. But more or less, for the most time, it is a liminal community. And even they are kind of shocked by him because of how properly liminal he is. again, so liminality, what it does when it works properly, it has the same effect on society as it has on the individual, in that it breaks down the structures and barriers of society, and it returns for a brief while, again, what I call the magic world. And the magic world is a world. So what magic is, what the magic experience is a disconnection of cause and effect. When you watch a magician, what you see is causes that don't have the effects they are supposed to have, and effects that don't come from the causes they're supposed to have. Right? It's a confusion of cause and effect, and in a this is one way. So this is the magic experience. I just want to be clear here. Magic in itself, as it's understood in an occult way, is the use of hidden energies so that you can cause effects that other people don't understand, right? Because you use, so a magician might believe in like a hidden sort of energy, like vril energy or whatever, like a prana or whatever, like the chi, and he will say, so through chi bending, I can make things levitate. And what he basically is engaged in is he's engaged in using a force that is occult, that is hidden, to to cause an effect that is not understandable by anyone who isn't vary to that power, which is why you have this saying that every sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. But the magic experience is a disconnection from cause and effect. So the magic world is a world which doesn't really make sense for a while. It's a world of senselessness. And it is, funnily enough, both so in the liminal figure, in terms of society, by creating a world of senselessness, he pulls the society into liminality itself, right? There's no more boundaries, there's no more direction, there's a sort of senselessness and indirection. And then he also returns it sometimes not, right? So if he's an evil figure, he just kind of like leads it into anarchy, basically. If he's a good figure, he returns it to a proper order, right? So this is effectively, for example, what Christ does in Israel in his incarnation, right? He takes everything, like he takes the entire order of the faith at the time, right? Which I call proto-Christianity, just to be edgy. I don't know. And
it's probably a better term, to be honest. Like no one should call it Judaism, because it wasn't.
Yes, because it's like nowadays we have a serious problem of signifiers. I think there's like other ways to call it, like Old Testament or whatever, but I just call it proto-Christianity. And it has devolved to such a way that he like causes massive discord into it, which is why the guys that don't convert to him, they make a massive uprising, the biggest uprising in the history of their people, right? They lead a massive uprising because it's the only other alternative they have for the state in which they were brought into. And again, this is kind of the dawn of the magic world in many ways. Something else that also has to be noted here is the people with which Ye is hanging out. Liminality is something that that is, of course, very common for us, which the main role for liminality outside of God and outside of Christ is within children, which again is also why we substitute liminality nowadays, because we don't have children anymore. And this is something that needs to be taken into account when you look at other countries around the world, right? When you look at Germany, when you look at England, when you look even at countries like Hungary or Poland, all of these countries don't have the age demographics that is necessary for liminal engagement. And you see it in the United States. The United States is something that most other countries don't have. They have a relatively stable age demographic. And right now they have a broader demographic demographic bracket, the millennials, which are kind of like 25 to 35, something around that, which are just starting to come into power in the United States. And they are still in a more childlike state. So you have a real possibility for liminality. You can see in the age demographics of the countries, you can predict how they will react to Ye. And with every country I tried this with, I was correct. The more bottom heavy the age demographics are, so the more kids the country has, the better they react to Ye. In Mexico, which is bottom heavy, endlessly bottom heavy, the reaction was very, very positive to him. Whilst in the United States, it's kind of mixed. And in European countries, it is almost only negative. And it's it's drowning out any positive responses. And I wouldn't say that it's strictly suppressing them, but effectively suppressing them, because you know that if you utter support for him, that you might live with consequences for that. Okay, so liminality, as I said, is something that is bereft from today's society. The reason that happened was the 70s. What effectively happened is there were certain, so for the United States it's the 70s, and by extension every Western country too, because culturally we are dependent and derivative of the United States. Short rundown, what happens is two things. A, computers start being used on a large scale in finance. This is huge because the way risk works in finance is so that you have two ways of risk. One is risk and the other one is uncertainty. Finance has no problem with risk. Finance dies with enough uncertainty. This is why in certain countries you're not able to set up correct financial institutions, because uncertainty is too high. Uncertainty is tied to liminality, because uncertainty means pure foundational unpredictability. So for example, a company might be risky in the sense of, for example, Bitcoin might be risky in the sense in which it can go up that much in price, down that much in price, right? It is uncertain in the way in which it potentially, I don't know if that potential is really there, but most Bitcoin, let's say, advocateurs say it is, in which it potentially changes the very foundation of monetary exchange in the world, right? So there is no knowing what a Bitcoin-run financial system would look like. So it's uncertain. While there is knowing what it would look like if Bitcoin lost 50% tomorrow. So it is a risk, right? So the one is computer models, which just exacerbated this degree of risk and uncertainty to a much higher level. Because as you give off things to the machine, you only, of course, give off things the machine can handle. The machine, however, takes over a much wider variety of traits. And so the machine becomes the dominant trader. And of course, everybody knows this nowadays with BlackRock, right? BlackRock is an enforcing mechanism that hates liminality. So it cannot handle it. BlackRock, and there's billions and trillions of dollars hedged on that, right? BlackRock is supposed to know what's going to happen tomorrow to the highest degree. And it has no ability, even like less than a fifth grader, to deal with uncertainty. Because to a human, the range between risk and uncertainty is much smaller than for a computer. And the other thing is, because of course computers can't do context, right? The other thing is in 71 is basically when banking in the United States won out against the state in a complete victory to unite with business, which is where you get the completion of what is called the managerial revolution. Ever since then, everything is basically run by managers and my ilk, which is managers, accountants, financial advisors, auditors, and all the other suits and bureaucrats, right? So all of these roles are, again, intrinsically hostile to liminality. And so any semblance of liminality is systematically selected against in society. And that is actually what we see happening, right? So what is Ye's role here? Ye is sitting on Alex Jones, who is a liminal figure in some sense, but he just isn't liminal enough, because you can put Alex Jones into a computer, basically. And he gives the one statement which cannot be computed. And that statement is, I love the Jews and I love Hitler.
Yes.
Right? It does not compute. It is not possible for the way society is set up. Everyone who looks at that, every human who looks at that, very obviously is engaged in the same thing. It's like, okay, he's kind of like taking love everybody to an extreme, right? They even want to kind of pull him back, right? Like Alex Jones tries that, Tim Pool tried that, I think even Lex Friedman tried that, where they want to pull him back, and it's like, we can say we love everybody, but just like, like give a bit of a nuance to that. But he's not having it, right?
That's kind of like, he's like, yes, I will love the particular people as well as the general picture, and that's what's needed. We ought to. If we take that message from it, then that's a good message. We should will everyone salvation.
And he like specifically goes up to them and says, specifically Hitler, right? And what he's doing there, right, is it's a very simple thing, right? He's basically taking the most picked on person, the most picked up kid on the schoolyard, and he goes to him and he says, I like specifically you as well. And now everybody says, well, that kid's so this is something else about schoolyards, right? As somebody who bullied some other kids, as somebody who has been bullied, they usually deserve it. I deserved it.
I deserved it too. I definitely deserved it at school. Yeah, I needed it.
Bullied kids deserve to be bullied, but it's still not okay to bully them. And it's the same with Hitler, right? And so when he says the things he says, right, and it's not all things, because up until that point he was still safe. There was one statement he topped, which can drag him all the way to the bottom, right? If he follows up on that. But up until that point, it is pure liminality, because it is the statement. So let's track back for a second. Everybody knows we have the same paradigm since 1945, right? And in it, we have supplanted, and again, we did the easy thing, we did the worldly thing. We have supplanted Satan with the Nazis. We've decided, like with Hitler, we've supplanted Satan with Hitler. We have supplanted the demons with the Nazis. This is why, in damage control against this, the Joe Biden account posted that Hitler was demonic, or that the Nazis were demonic, right?
I've just had a thought. That's why Jordan Peterson is kind of boring in a way. Like, he has all this interesting stuff. He's kind of grasping at it, but then he makes the postmodern neo-Marxists the demons.
Yes. And it's like, no. No. And that's exactly the thing. Like, talk to a postmodern neo-Marxist, right? Talk to, like, what I did on the internet in my, like, access to every person on the world is I talked to every person in the world, right? I talked to neo-Nazis. I talked to, and I can do a stream in the future where I kind of like talk about the more edgy things. I always knew that one day I'm going to be off YouTube anyway, so I'm going to do it after I've saved all my videos so I can upload them somewhere else. Even though that I think, so for example, my take on the Holocaust is actually the same take I was taught in school, but the weird thing is, like, it's like literally what I was taught in history focus class in school. The weird thing is is, I think if I'm going to say it on YouTube, I'm actually going to get banned, because in our history textbook, we had, for example, the 6 million figure as one of 3 estimates. I think one was 2.5 million, 4 million, and 6 million dead, right?
We got 11 million when I was at school.
No, 11 million is Jews plus others. 11 million is Jews plus others. So there's figures for Jews, and then this is something that other people don't understand, right? Like Holocaust. I guess I don't want to call them deniers, because like the vast majority of them don't deny that like Jews were interned and put into the camps. Like it starts at denying that they were intentionally killed, which already, so that one is a bit hard to very hard to.
That's very difficult. That's very difficult. I mean, I know people in real life whose like grandparents saw what happened in Lithuania.
So right? Here's the thing. Right? So this is another thing that most people don't get, is we were taught, again in focus class, that, and this is something that I blame purely. So I'm the son of a documentary director. I know how documentaries are made. Don't trust documentaries, people. The problem is there are 2 kinds of documentaries. One is the ones that the documentarians actually want to make. They are good. Most documentaries are things that are given kind of like as a sideshow to fill up program. And these documentaries, the documentarian knows what he wants to shoot before he researches his topic. This, I think, is how most Americans, like I'm talking about 90% of Americans, got their education on World War II. It's the only way I can explain why certain things are in such weird proportions. Again, we were taught in history focus course that the gas chamber very likely was a very unusual way to kill people. We were taught that the vast majority of people in internment camps were called by what is called a Nackenschussgerät in German. It's a neck shooting device. These things were there. These things were present. You could look at them. These are effectively little guns you put in the back of what looks like a measuring device, which you measure your height with.
The one you kill a cow with, you know, like you've got the stun gun for the cow.
They're similar, right? And it immediately makes sense why you would use these, because they feel more humane, because the person thinks he gets measured, right? Their height gets measured, which they, of course, like every prison had routine checkups. So they think they get into a routine checkup and then it's over, right? And of course, that is what those who, let's say, use the Holocaust as a cautionary tale warn of, right? It's a very, it's obvious, it's an inhumane treating of human like cattle, exactly, because you use the same thing you would do on a cow, right? And it makes much more sense on the sort of like it ceases to make Nazism cartoonish, right? Because you understand this is a death factory, but it's not like a fort, you know, like fort factory.
I mean, it sounds like a Dr. It sounds. It kind of contributes to the satanic kind of aura around the Nazis, doesn't it?
Yeah, and what it does is you start understanding. Okay, these are humans like me, and I understand how they can also how they can do this. Because if you look at like documentaries and stuff, it's like, who would do that? Like, who would put like 20 people in a room and basically push a button and then they're all dead? It's very weird, right? And there is speculation that was done, that there were like ways to like mass execute people in gas chambers later to get rid of a lot of people.
They killed Edith Stein that way.
Huh?
Like they used to use okay, so Saint Edith Stein was martyred that way, or killed that way. I recall carbon monoxide being used, so they'd have the trucks come up and they just switch the engine on. Like that. That seems pretty straightforward. Yeah, to suffocate.
So again, like there's a huge issue there with kind of the communication of it. But all of that is not really important for the paradigm we live under, because the paradigm we live under and all of the cartoonish things have arisen, right? The things you fight against is really that cartoonishness, and it feels weird to so many people on the internet, is that there's so much stuff that is obviously false, right? That kind of gets played up with this. Why is that happening? Because we live under the same paradigm, under the same social rule, under the same, let's say, quote unquote, theology, right? And that is why we call it the Holocaust and not the Jewish genocide of, the 1940s, right? Which is, Holocaust is a theological term. It's what I usually avoid using because the prayer book I have actually mentions it, and it feels kind of weird to pray in the morning, oh God, I want to offer you a Holocaust. But of course, for those who don't know Holocaust, the real meaning is burnt offering. So what he's doing right now, of course, is shattering, or is attempting to shatter this paradigm. And I think most people are aware of that. And if it was just that, let's say there probably would be less buzz around it. And I've lost most of my viewership here, so I think like most people think that I've gotten to the end of what I wanted to say. But oh no, we're just getting started. So
we're going for an hour and a half.
Yeah, we're probably going to go for a bit more. I hope you can stay with me here. We're about halfway through actually only.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So the next important thing is of course so we need this. We need somebody to say this for the orientation of our contemporary faith. Okay? We need
I'll be back in 2 seconds. Keep talking, I'm just going to pop to the loo.
Okay. So we need someone to talk about these kind of things, to talk about, to make that extreme step to say, if we really are to love our enemies, then we need to love basically the persona non grata of Western society himself. And the way he does it, the way he stands up for that, that is something that is, again, in all these things I've talked about with liminality right now, it is necessary. It is a necessary step of liminality. There was never going to be a salvific liminality in the West that wasn't basically saying these words, that wasn't basically saying, I love Hitler, because again, it's the one statement that doesn't compute. And of course, following it by I love Jews, or I think preceding it by I love Jews, is more of a clarification on how it is to be computed, because that is of course the liminal space that you enter. But the other thing with liminality that I've kind of touched upon, and that I think everybody is deathly afraid of right now, especially on the right, is that Ye obviously is not mentally well. Liminality and insanity, they are very, very close concepts, okay? And so what I want to say in the second part is, you shouldn't expect a liminal figure, an effective liminal figure, if you want him to be an effective liminal figure. You shouldn't expect him to be what you consider sane. And you shouldn't expect him to be successful in what he's doing if he was what we consider sane. And to understand that, I first want to give a short history on psychology. Okay. This is the second of 3 topics. These are 2 shorter topics, so we're still halfway through. It's not going to be a third through. So, psychology is a very young discipline. I wouldn't even call it as much a field of science, because right now it is not a science in any real sense. It is a discipline. It's something that people practice. It is an art, maybe. It definitely isn't a science. It has, of course, if we talk about scientific method as we use it today, it has one of the lowest replication rates ever. It doesn't really make good predictions, right? There's only a very, very small corpus of things within the psychological mainstream, I guess we could say, or within the psychological literature that we can say is actually solid. And most of it is around, okay, this is stuff that actually works, not in practice. So we have 3 steps of psychology basically. The first one is Freudian psychology. The second one is Jungian psychology immediately after Freud, building in a different direction. The last one is later psychology. Later psychology started in the 70s, played a huge role, 60s, 70s, played a huge role in destroying the sort of frameworks of the West. So the West, up until this point, had already started kind of because psychology inhibited kind of the same or similar space to spirituality. So it had kind of already started equating spirituality and psychology in, let's say, impure ways. Later psychology basically gave that the death kick. That is the reason why we have the New Age movement. These are people like Timothy Leary, who I've talked about before on the Settler stream, who believed that he actually kind of humanity went through 8 stages of consciousness. We were currently on the 4th. The hippies were already on the 5th, and we needed to get to the 8th to be able to be a spacefaring civilization. While all other, of course, existing alien civilizations were on these levels of consciousness, and the only reason why we couldn't talk to them was because we weren't conscious enough. So basically, the solution was free sex, free rock and roll, whatever, drugs. Oh yeah, drugs were a huge thing, and that way we would become a free spacefaring civilization. That stuff was massive. None of it was in any way, shape, or form even remotely based on anything other than basically the availability. The reason it worked was, again, demographic liminality, the effect of the boomer generation and of the summer of love and so on and so forth is that age demographics bring with them liminality. Here you have the example of liminality kind of being a very destructive force, right? It was an unchrist-like, God-denying liminality, and it did huge damage to the West. Okay, so this is data psychology. We won't be caring for that because the thing we want to consider now, the streams we consider now, is Freudian and Jungian psychology, and the reason is Freudian psychology, and it's actually the stream that I am mostly I am a fan of the most. It is, let's say, the most applicable. It's the most stable one, but it had a critical endemic flaw in it from the beginning, and that is Freud effectively has this pagan view of the world, where again you have this idea of a civil society where everybody's kind of nice and good, and the people who are insane are people who dysfunction within this society. They are malfunctioning people. And in that framework, he develops ideas about their inner work and their inner being to be able to construct them or to basically help them get access back into civil society. Now, of course, Freud's civil society looks kind of like picket fancy, and so you have your nice family and your 3 kids, and you kind of work as a law clerk in Vienna, and everything is nice. So sadly, many people would think, oh no, wait, that's exactly what we want. So what's the problem with it? But there was a huge issue with it. So basically, Freud's idea of dysfunction, when it was into practice, became a sort of heuristic of the only problem that people can have psychologically, or the only problem that's important psychologically, is things that make them so they can't work a 9-to-5 job and be pleasant while doing so. The first thing that absolutely broke us as a society that came from this was that it was realized by psychologists that the only thing that barred homosexuals, who back then were still considered mentally disturbed, that barred homosexuals from performing well in society was them being at odds with their own homosexuality, them beating themselves up over it. They started to realize that if you can teach a homosexual man to say, oh, I like being homosexual, I want to be homosexual, that is the point at which he resumes function in society. This is where the entire self-acceptance therapeutic approach comes from. And of course, we know nowadays that this is an absolute dead end, right? Because these people don't cease being unwell. These people don't cease being dysfunctional just because they say, I like this now, I like myself now. Psychology, psychological well-being isn't about self-acceptance. However, to this day, we have no good standard for functionality in psychology outside of strict, immediate tendencies to harm self and others. So even people who want to say, yes, rhetoric is harming others, and there is a small case to be made, a small indirect case to be made, because you can say he is enabling figures who actively want to harm others. There's an indirect line of reasoning, and we can't just like argue it away on let's say on its argument itself, because that would like on any other topic you would say like for you would agree with that, right? When other people kind of like speak good about your enemies and on people who actively want to harm you, then you of course take offense with that, right? If someone, if let's say if you're a white person, I think most people here watching are probably white people, right? If someone gives money to Black Lives Matters activists who go around and saying we need to kill whitey, you will not say or gives even like credence or an audience to them or something like that, or says, well, they're good activists, they're good people, stuff like that. Anything, you will say, oh, that person is also engaged in basically conspiring against me or working against me, right? So we can't say, like, we can't absolve that argument on its merits and say, no, just because he says he likes Nazis doesn't mean he gives them a platform. The thing is that what I would say is that he preaches more about following Christ. The thing he is mostly about is following Christ. When he's asked, like, what is your website? It's the Bible. All the statements he had, almost all the statements we have, and we also get to the dicey one later. I know we already got to the dicey one. The dicey one, of course, being denying the numbers in the Holocaust. And it's not, I don't think, I'll be real here, right? I don't think he's going to stand up and says, oh no, it wasn't 6 million, it was actually 2.5 million. He's probably going to, like, he very possibly could stand up and say, oh, it wasn't 6 million, it was, I don't know, 400,000, or they made it all up, right? But all the other statements, all these statements of like, I love Hitler, I'm a white supremacist, whatever, I would say are much more, they are reconcilable, because the focus he has, and again, the insanity kind of enables it, because the only coherent stance he has is Christ. Everything else you corner him on, he can't really handle. He is too disordered for that. But on that singular topic, and only that topic, he is consistent. So that would be the answer to he enables other voices to kind of who want to, let's say, do active harm, because let's not kid ourselves, right? Like, there's so many people on the right wing who are saying, oh, I'm the good Nazi and stuff like that, and they hang out with like Kike Slayer 99 on whatever platform, and that guy just killed people. Like, come on, like, you can't be, you have to make the distinction, right? If you want to say, oh, I'm not a harmful person, and like your body is basically like, oh man, you know nothing, I'm going to make them pay. We need to make them pay, get yourself weapons, and you don't stand there and like confront him every single time. You're not one of the good ones. Like, that's not a joke, right? Like, the winds can turn, and then it is your responsibility to have those people in check who are like, once the winds turn, they're just going out there. Okay, so this much on that. But again, like, yes, Ye can't really speak or support any group because he's too chaotic for that. He's too incoherent for that. The only message, the only coherent message he has is Christ, is Christianity, is the very basic baby Christianity, he calls it himself, he has. Okay? And again, so there's no way to say that he is dysfunctional in the way which we have nowadays, because we don't have a standard for dysfunctionality. We didn't have it for a very long time. It's one of the issues we have with psychology nowadays, right? This doesn't mean that there is necessarily no such standard, but the way the West has gone about it so far has failed, right? So, and the only standard we can set here, in my opinion, is God, right? Because you see saints, you see the journey saints go through, and sometimes they go into something that is very obviously insanity, but they don't become dysfunctional, right? Yet on the other hand, we do see people who go into insanity and they do become obviously dysfunctional in a way, right? Again, I have insanity in my own family. I know what dysfunctionality looks like. You can develop a schizophrenia, for example, so severe that you think that like everybody who wears a suit is actually a federal agent who wants to kill you. Okay? Of course, we are here. This is not like these people aren't technically self-harming, right? But this is obviously a degree of non-functionality. But where does the border end? Where does the border begin? Again, with an idea of, do these people fit in society? We do not get far. And the last thing on this idea is that it like inherently condemns liminality. And there's a very funny symbiosis that this sort of psychology had gotten into and still is in with business. And that is again, business, banking, it erodes liminality, not only in the models they have, but also in the culture they require of their members, right? Business world is a world that doesn't allow for the human element. It's a world that in most cases, in most firms, doesn't allow for liminality. I also have psychotherapists in my family who happen to be based in German's larger metropolitan areas. Happen to be based
north.
and based also in Germany's larger metropolitan areas. The main money a psychotherapist makes is from the big four consulting firms, so KPMG, Deloitte, PwC, and always forget the last one, not important, and the big banks. These are the people who are denied liminality the most, who then steer into insanity, right? Okay, so again, dysfunction and societal dysfunction and liminality are effectively the same. You can kind of compensate that through exiting society and living a hermitage life, which is something many people do in the West, right? And basically living a life aside from society. But if you do that, you can never complete that rite of passage. You can never return into society unless you return to who you were before your rite of passage. Okay? So, in all of that, in very recent years, I'm referencing books that have been written like in parts like 2021. We have slowly started developing a new approach to sanity. Okay? There are huge therapeutic successes with that. And the biggest therapeutic success with this is curing addiction through transgressive acts such as changing the environment or going mountaineering. Okay, this was something that in kind of like the literature on addiction you find again and again and again. There were these studies, of course, all the way back to the Vietnam War, where soldiers went to Vietnam. When they were in Vietnam, they became addicted to opium, severely addicted, whilst they were on the battlefield. As soon as they switched back their environment and went back home, they were completely off the stuff, right? These approaches were kind of up and down because it became very clear that it wasn't like the environment qua the environment. So you can't take a kid from so something that happened and something that is actually also in part based on this idea was the idea of, oh, we can just take refugees from Syria, war-torn Syria, like civil war-torn Africa somewhere, put them into Europe. It's a change of environment. They're going to change. It's not the same school because, of course, it's in this case like more about like civil behavior and not about sanity, core sanity, but it is very close, right? And the
Magic soil.
Yeah, magic soil kind of stuff. Of course, it didn't happen, right? Same idea with kind of like integrating people who are of course, let's say, on the sociopathic or schizophrenic side, to such an effect that they become what's it called? They become outlaws, right? Put them into a different environment. Didn't work. So it isn't the environment qua environment. It also is, and this is the important part, how we interact with our environment. Okay, so here is a class of people that is possibly the most at risk of falling into insanity. Genius mathematicians. Why do you think that is, CTS?
I remember G.K. Chesterton actually wrote about this in Orthodoxy, and he said it was the tendency to try and bridge the infinite gap with a finite mind. And so that leads to the brain sort of snapping in a certain way. Like, you can only interact with the world in a certain poetic way. And because mathematics is reliant on such a univocal use of terms, they can't really reconcile with reality, and so that drives them into madness.
Yes, this is a very sensible take on it. Okay, but the wider thing is very much this: genius, as it works, and I've put up here people Georg Cantor, Ludwig Boltzmann, Kurt Gödel, Alan Turing, and Nikola Tesla, all of whom went insane. All of them did something that even genius only rarely does, and that is they engaged in pure liminality. They pushed the limits of what we thought about the world in its space constraints. They navigated an obviously fundamentally new reality. Because imagine what would happen if the laws of physics changed, right? Now, of course, they don't change, but for these people, the laws of physics or the laws of mathematics kind of change, right? It's a complete loss of boundaries. And in this, if you try to capture this, your insanity does you in, right? It takes you to the grave. However, very short ago, piggybacking back on Carl Jung, there was also the development of the other thing that happens here. And again, we're getting back into the anthropological idea of liminality, where we go into the rite of passage, are in that scenario for a while, in the liminal space for a while, and then return. And that is hypersanity. And the funny thing is the way Jung kind of figures into this is much less in his writings about psychology and much more in his writings about himself. Because Carl Jung himself actually went insane, right? And if you read like the mystical stuff he does, right, like the things he gets into with alchemy and with Hinduism and so on and so forth, he starts having visions, right? He starts having visitations, so on and so forth. He goes, by his own admission, to some degree insane. He comes out of it being a man whom we would then know as the sage of what's the city called?
Psychoanalysis?
No, it's
city.
It's Bern or it's Baden. I don't know. But basically, he goes out of that. He comes out of that being known as a sage, right? And one of the wisest men in Europe at his time, basically. And slowly there has developed this idea on insanity, that madness and insanity are in many ways a normal aspect of human life. The case for this is also that once we started defining things such as schizophrenia, right? If you look at the behavior typical of schizophrenia a priori, right now, kind of look it up, schizophrenia symptoms, you will see that there are certain times in your life when you're very stressed out or something where you behave like this, right? This doesn't mean you're schizophrenic, right? But the behavior is similar. That's already something of note, but it's not too, let's say, giving away. The other reason is that so many people become schizophrenics. It's about 1% of society. So 1 in 100 people develop like a legit diagnosable schizophrenia. And again, there's many behaviors and kind of like ways and modes people are in that are kind of like seem almost like soft forms of schizophrenia in how they appear, right? So the idea is that there could be a, let's say, a severity of experience and a severity of challenge of the world for which you go insane. And there is no necessity for us to believe right now that if you are in such a mode, engaging that mode, that what we conceive of as sanity would be the preferable state to handle this. So effectively what I'm saying, if we come back to Ye, is I'm saying he lost his wife, right, whom he still loves, or like very much seems so, right? He lost an like unbelievable amount of money. Probably like 80 to 90% of the people, celebrities, of course, have like huge phone lists because everybody wants the number. 80% to 90%, maybe even 99% of people he engaged with in his life probably have just shut their door to him, right? And he doesn't see that he did anything wrong except for, and that is the last thing, but he isn't proud about it either. Because in the case of his wife, which is the one case which is removed from his original tweet, the DEFCON 3 tweet, he went on stage on Alex Jones and said, I deserve to lose my wife because I was watching pornography. Right? I flaunted my marriage because I was watching pornography. All of these other things, it is not clear to me that insanity or the mania, which he very obviously is having a manic episode in Alex Jones. When he takes out Netanyahu, which is a hilarious joke, but when he takes it out, and then when he starts playing around it, you can very easily see that the way he interacts with the room at that time is what we could call dissociative, right? But it is not clear that to me, and it's not clear, for, let's say, from a psychological standpoint. And you guys can see how psychology is kind of bogged nowadays. You can see how psychology enables people who are very obviously mentally unwell, like people who suffer from, well, what would you even call it, transsexual disorder or whatever you want to call it. I think all the labels have been taken off, right? But who suffer from these very obvious mental traumas and mental states that we also don't know how to approach them at the moment, because they also go into work, right? And they don't run around with a knife killing people. So because we are so bereft of standards in the West, we can't apply anything else and say, hold on a second, right? Like that, like on a large scale, all of that behavior is something that runs counterproductive to your soul, to your well-being, to your place with God, with Christ, in communion with the other people around it, because we don't use that language anymore. And when I look at Ye, the only, let's say, maladaptiveness I see is liminality, right? And liminality and insanity, they can go hand in hand. He is not taken away from the role he's playing right now by being manic, like by having manic episodes, right? He does not trade in, let's say, his dependability as a liminal figure, as a figure who can produce a liminal outcome by having manic episodes on Alex Jones. So something that also needs to come with this in the, let's say, in the engagement with this and with these kind of terminology is a re-examination of the significance of, again, like saintly writings, of things like the Dark Night of the Soul, right? Because there was a time when effectively the way that academia and psychology looked at these things were like, okay, so basically either you can have like a manic episode and you can like give yourself like self-therapy, and that way you get out of it, and you basically like through healing has a therapeutic effect. Again, going back to okay, I thought you were cutting out, but I think you just muted yourself.
No, I wasn't. I was just talking to my wife.
Okay, so it's basically not a. So one of the things was, okay, you basically can give yourself therapy, and the other one is insanity is something that has the capability for cults. Prime example being Rasputin, right? So all of these religious figures, they're actually, in a sense, insane, and they thereby draw this religious audience to them. And that was basically the two big explanations for things like, again, the Dark Night of the Soul. So Webham as aristocrat says, so what Kanye is doing is not a conscious attempt at doing an avant-garde performance art. No, like most artists don't perform consciously at all. There's a very good German children's book. I think it doesn't exist in any other language, but maybe look up regardless if it maybe does exist. In German, it's called Die Stadt der träumenden Bücher. The literal English translation would be the City of Dreaming Books. In it is the best explanation of what artists are and are engaged in, and that is the main character is a big lizard dragon type thing who wants to become a poet, and in order to become a poet, he has to get in contact with a cosmic force called Om. And as soon as he gets into contact with that, he basically experiences complete like flow and inspiration and everything, and he's able to write perfect texts. And most things that artists do follow, and this is kind of what I want to get to, is they do follow a very strict and very central logic, and there's a very reason for them, right? But these artists learned over the time of becoming artists and of becoming successful and good artists, and Ye is a good artist. They learned to not try to do this consciously, right? So my father explained it to me this one time. So I had this belief when I was about 13. I just watched an anime. I just watched Code Geass, and I thought Code Geass was brilliant, which nowadays I don't think so much anymore, but back then I did. And I said, oh, Dad, you can really tell if a writer is brilliant, because, of course, the writer has to be at least as intelligent as his most intelligent character. My father basically said to me, no, when writers get into that certain stage which they need to be successful, they can become more intelligent than they actually are, right? So you can be like Ye on the show, he said he's like 97 IQ or something. He is a genius. He's an artistic, lyrical genius. He could still be 97 IQ, right? These things do not take from one another, because the artistic world is a is a let's say it's not a real, like, it's not like the Platonic world of forms, where it's like a second reality basically superimposed to ours, but it is a sort of like second realm in a figurative sense, in a in a very actual figurative sense, and in cooperation with that, you develop a way of reason and of reasoning that is still as reliable as reasoning qua reasoning. And again, this very heavily draws into the idea of liminality. This very heavily draws into this idea of the breakdown of reality. And that is why I'm saying he's not conscious of this. He doesn't have a master plan. He's not like intelligently trying to do something here, but he still is doing it correctly so far, and we can expect him, like more likely than not, to continue doing it correctly in the future. Okay, even though there is no active reasoning or awareness of doing the things I'm saying here, art works in such a way that there is a sort of like an obviousness to him. And the thing, again, like the thing with which all of this falls and stands, and will be basically like the entire effect he will have on the West, and hopefully the good effect, the effect of pushing us along, will be in it will stand and fall with his baby Christianity, which he calls it, right? And if he can, let's say, if he can keep to that, if he can like go deeper and deeper and deeper into that, right, and closer and closer and closer to Christ, and elaborate on that, then he can break the paradigm. And here's something else. A lot of Wignat types believe that what he's doing now is he's naming the Jews and he's praising Hitler and so on and so forth, right? And that when he's, let's say, done, or the effect they hope for him to have, or they want for him to have, or the effect they think is necessary, is that on the other side, everybody's like, yo, the number one star in the world, he was like, I love Hitler, and I love Hitler now as well. Let's go do the Nazi salute. We're all going to rush the White House and take over the United States of America. This is going to be the 5,000-year Reich. Yes. No. If he has the effect of a liminal figure, that means that once this entire thing is over, National Socialism will be exactly as relevant to the current debate as Jacobinism is, as the Church of Pure Reason is, as all the other, like as German anti-Napoleonic nationalism is. All the other ideas and social constructs that were married to their spirit of the times died when that spirit died with them. It is not Ye's function to bring about something that is from our spirit of the times. That is not the function of a liminal figures, especially not at that scale at which he is, because again, he's inputting directly the words that do not compute to the paradigm, to the spirit of the age that we have, right? It is not his function to bring up something from that. It is his function to bookend that, to make the entire idea of like Nazis being significant, like go away, right? To make the entire idea, because let's think of things all of you guys have probably said at some point. If everyone's special, no one is, right? If everyone's super, no one is, right? These are things everyone kind of said in regards to the to this kind of like women's Olympics and then give trophy culture, stuff like that. If everyone's a special child, no one's a special child, right? If we love, if we don't exclude fascists, communists, what else is there, like from from the current paradigm. I don't know, like the Chinese, as he says, the Zionists, right? Balenciaga. If we don't exclude them from our love, we clean the slate, and none of these things are special anymore. None of these things become transgressive anymore. None of these things are particularly interesting. And that is when you get to the point, when you get to the magical world where for a time, like everything is numb and weird. It's what you have in the dark night of the senses, the dark night of the soul. And then you get past that and you have forgotten the past, and there will be things that we have never seen before, right? That is the possibility that saying what he says, and again, only saying what he says, this was always needing to happen in this way, because the society is so clamped down that the liminal figure would have to speak out against hating Nazis whilst themselves being not in any way interested in Nazism. And Ye isn't interested in Nazism for the very simple reason that he has no concept of politics. You can see that in this presidential run right now. He goes on Alex Jones. He says, "Oh, I have plans and everything." Nick and Milo probably do, right? They probably have like a political platform and they have I don't know, like a social policy and a financial policy or something. They probably have ideas of that. Okay. He obviously doesn't. When he is asked on that, he just sits there and he says, why don't we give that question to Nick, right? And in that, the only utility he provides is, again, saying the things that don't compute, breaking the system, breaking the inputs, right? Breaking the machine up like that. Okay, so the final thing we will get into, and it's not going to be a 3-hour stream, but the final thing we will get into for the day is what's going to be the future, what's going to be the effects of this. Okay. Now, if you thought up until now we were technical, oh boy. So, oh yeah, this is a German stream, my friends. We will not talk about social life in a, you know. I need metrics, you know. We do not talk about social life in any like human way. We compute it. Okay, so this
computing
is
the social.
Huh?
Computing the social.
Exactly, we're computing the social. So this is social theory. This is the kind of stuff. So there's a book. There exists a book. It's called Foundations of Social Theory. James S. Coleman, right? It's the highest, the book I hold in highest regard that has no like religious intent in it at all. Okay? It's a 1,000-page doozy on what makes humans tick as groups. It's really good. If you are like into stuff like the NRX or like, I don't know, like Oren McIntyre on Twitter or stuff like that. Weak, useless, waste of time. Read this book. Everything they said is in there and infinitely more. It's very good. Okay, so my short advertisement on the book, no one's going to read anyways, is over.
I wrote it down on my piece of paper, right? I might read it.
Oh yeah, I have actually successfully shared this to other Germans. I have had people text me with the book in hand saying, I have that book. I'm like, yes, do it, read it. It's an absolute horror show to get through. I mean, it's purely technical. Still, read it. Okay, so what it does, it treats trust as, I'm calling it here logarithmic resource. It's not really logarithmic, but I think it's like the function that most people kind of can still think. Okay.
I can see how that would work. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just realizing I teach mathematics for a living. I should have like figured out that still nobody knows Well, not for a living, but
So so logarithmic curve goes like that.
no.
So it goes like this.
Yeah,
It does.
it kind of like
It does, because like as you increase the magnitude, the indices of the number goes down like relative for each
yes,
step. So it does end up going a bit like this.
yeah.
I mean, granted,
No,
I'm drawing it a little bit differently because I'm on camera and everything, so it's more
yeah,
like that.
it doesn't go down. It goes up infinitely. It doesn't even converge. So it never really like approaches any value. It goes actually to infinity, but it goes flatter and flatter and flatter and flatter. So the idea behind this is, if you have nobody you trust, the trust you invest in others is immediately maximum. Okay? So if you're outside of society, this is where you fall for charlatans. I wrote about this in parts on my Substack, actually, in one of the posts where I post about like trust being a resource, basically, and or not trust being an equation. And so the idea is scammers work like that. They make intentionally like bad emails so they can filter for people who are like on the lower rungs of society, right? Outsiders, idiots, that kind of crowd, loners, right? People who desperately want the scam to be true. Because again, you invest, like if you are at a certain level, you invest everyone with like your maximum trust. You sometimes get this if you talk to homeless people. By the way, people, talk to homeless people. It's Christian. Also, do volunteering. Very important. Rant over. If you talk to homeless people, they also sometimes suddenly invest you with massive amounts of trust. Sometimes, and this is something that can happen like also with mentally ill people or stuff like that, certain ways of mental illness, they suddenly want you to more or less run their life, right? Logarithmic resource. If you have a big social network, you're very, very slow to trust people. If you have a small one, you're very, very easy to trust. Like you're very, very quick to trust people. Okay, wasn't that also like a part of Trump's aesthetic? Yes, yes. Okay, so.
Wait a minute. That means that just something completely unrelated. That means the Christian life is easier to fulfill knowing more people. Because, as the psalm says, trust not in princes, right? But if you have few people around, then you're more liable to trust them psychologically.
Yes. And there's this idea about Christianity, it's about the desert fathers, which is a very bad idea, is that Christian hermitage, and actually in the early church, there was this fight about hermitage, in which especially this kind of hermitage was kind of like drowned out. Christian hermitage is never intentionally disconnecting itself from other people. Okay? Christian hermitage
reminds me of something.
Yeah.
Let me just read this, because St. Benedict talks a little bit about this. Let me find the beginning of his rule, because he talks about the 4 different kinds of monks. And he mentioned a particular kind. I know that some people, or at least I think I've heard people say, oh, this was just Benedict being like a bigot or whatever. But I think that this nails down what you're saying. Let me find it. So he mentions, let me just find the 4 kinds of monks. Keep going, I'll look for it in the book.
Okay. So
here we go.
Yeah.
So the first are Cenobites. So those are monks that we typically know. The second are anchorites or hermits, as you've just mentioned, which are like people, this is what he says, who not in the first fervor of conversion, but after long trial in the monastery, and already taught by the example of many others, have learnt to fight against the devil, are well prepared to go forth from the ranks of the brotherhood to the single combat of the desert. Now that's how he describes the hermits. But the third category is the one that we that I think we're talking about, like simply lone, like people who are just kind of doing their own thing. The third and worst kind of monk is that of the Sarabites, who have not been tried under any rule nor schooled by any experienced master, as gold is proved in the furnace, but soft as is lead and still in their works cleaving to the world, are known to lie to God by their tonsure.
Yes. And this is the Saint Benedicts of the Benedictines, right?
Yeah, and he mentions this 4th kind as well, which are called the Gyrovagi, or wanderers. These move about all their lives through various countries, staying as guests for 3 or 4 days at different monasteries. They are always on the move and never settle down, and are slaves to their own wills and to the enticements of gluttony.
Yes, exactly. So there is such a thing as so for example in the Desert Father, there is such a thing as a certain isolation. But that is more so basically you go into a room, you check with your mates, you basically tell them I'm going into isolation now, you go into a room, and if worst comes to worst, if they think you're kind of losing it in there, which did happen, they also pull you out, right? It's like what people do when they go into, and this is also something that can become dangerous, is these kind of like isolation floating tanks, right? Where you kind of go into sensory deprivation. You need to have like people who are like with you there, who like talk about that kind of experience with community, you know, that they get you to the tank. And basically, I mean, you don't like, they don't have to like wave you in when they close the lid, but you need like these forms of isolation are always only temporary, right? We call ourselves sheep not only because we're vulnerable and set on by wolves, but also because we live in herds. We're a herd animal, okay? We cling together. We need each other. We need communion to enter into communion with Christ. We need social communion to enter into communion with Christ. Okay, so the next thing that is important to understand trust and how it works and functions is that it tries to maybe you can direct me into the terminology from computer science, but there is there are algorithms which try to find the fastest way somewhere, and they have an name like
Okay,
A stars, I think is one, or
Sorry?
A stars.
What did you
A star.
So pathfinding algorithms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trust effectively has a sort of like a pathfinding algorithm to it. Okay. And you see this shown on the right. So this is what is called here trust complexity formation through linking intermediated nodes. So you see here, I hope you guys can all see it clearly.
I think your phone died, honey. Bevs. I think the internet's gone.
Hello?
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry,
So I just being actually heard me. I was like, because we've been tethering a mobile phone to get our internet, right? So yeah, I thought that the phone had died. So yeah.
No. I have my phone here. I just wanted to switch to my phone, then the internet went back on. I'm sorry for that.
Fair enough.
Well, we have the structure C trusts A trusts B trusts T, right? So A, through looking at B and looking at the next connection for B, also builds up the trust connection to T, right? So C, looking at A, right? Now the B one is omitted, but it usually would also kind of like take place, but it's here to kind of just to have less errors basically. B looking at T, C looking at A also builds up in the second step or in the third step that trust connection to T now also. And this is the other thing that is funny is that because C trusts T, right, and B also trusts T, B starts trusting C, right? Because basically, like if you're in a community, right, and you both, I don't know, like you're into a certain YouTuber, you know, weird guy on the internet, very small channel called ST. No, but you're into a certain YouTuber, for example, and of course, when there's a meetup, you will start socializing and way easier trusting the people were also there, and you're also like, oh yeah, that Minecraft video, whatever he made, was amazing, right? So you trust them because they have the same trust reference as you. So not only do you trust the people you trust, right? So your dad trusts that car mechanic, so you go there as well. But you also trust the people whom trust in the same people as you. This is kind of like group allegiance. You see how this is a very, very like easily expanding and easily exploding mechanism, right? That tries to always optimize itself into trusting, quote unquote, the right people. Okay. Somebody says this is also a little bit like interests work, in my opinion. Can you clarify, please, in the comments? Do you mean interest in the monetary sense, or do you mean interest in the sense of like being interested in someone, having common interests? This leads to at the end of the day, an actually very like fluctuating social situation, because these kind of like these cycles that set themselves up in reality, these circles that set themselves up in reality, they expand quickly because everybody like, oh, you trust that, oh, you trust that, you trust that. This is what we're experiencing as a fad, right? As something that just starts expanding. This is what meme magic is, okay? They also collapse quickly. This is the part that Fortune doesn't want to see. This is the part that Fortune doesn't want to know, right? But these kind of like trust boundaries also fall in on themselves. And this is what happened in 2020, when trust in Trump wasn't as easy anymore. In 2016, it was very easy. Meme magic was high, right? And it is this kind of like thing that sets it up. Pampa says in the comments, for example, being interested in bikes. Yes, it's exactly like this. We'll get into that in a second. So these cycles set themselves up easily. They crash easily. They can be held up, right? So society, of course, as we see it, doesn't like fundamentally change its makeup every single time, right? Somebody says meme magic got co-opted by 3-letter agencies. I will disagree with that. I will very much disagree with that, actually. People on the internet severely overestimate the effectability and let's say just attunedness of 3-letter agencies, because effectively what they will do, and it is a faith response in a sense, right? Effectively what they will do is they will take things like MK Ultra. They will say, okay, so they were working on kind of like manipulating people, manipulating the mind. We only know maybe 10% of that. And then they will be filling it in with everything they know is kind of like to be known about the mind, and will assume that that is the missing 90% that the 3-letter agencies have. I don't see any evidence of any of the 3-letter agencies, and I don't deny that they are the enemies of the people. But again, the issue more is that they too are intrinsically hostile against liminality. They're intrinsically hostile against uncertainty. Again, they love risks, hate uncertainty. Everything they think they can control, they like. Everything they think they cannot, they dislike. They deceive themselves a lot, just like the banks, okay? The banks think way more things are risks that are actually uncertainties, right? For example, I think none of the banks really knew what would happen with the 2008 financial crash. Again, not just in how much the money went down, but also just like the sociocultural changes that occurred. Okay. So, but going back to this, you can kind of arrest that. Okay. what you need to set up is effectively a coalition of elites that produces what we see in everyday life. And that is a sort of like, so it's a sort of like prestige society in which prestige is a secondary resource like money, which you can spend and retain. So, for example, Dr. Fauci, when he goes up onto TV, tells everyone, get the jab. He knows, to some degree, hopefully, that he is trading in prestige, right? He is trading in his authority as the science, as the medicine man, in a way, sense in which he trades money, right? He has a certain amount of goodwill he can spend. He has a lot of it because he's put in front of TV as the doctor man, and the doctor man generally is somebody whom society trusts. So he's invested with a lot of it, but he has to spend it to a certain degree, right? This calculation is actually what keeps wicked people from completely just screwing you over every single time, or like completely abusing trust every single time. Because let's say when everything else fails, there's still the very flat calculation of if you lie once, they don't trust you again, basically. Okay. And this, of course, means that an elite kernel, right, or an elite circle, an elite superstructure, also is a, let's say, trust/prestige, we could say a billionaire class. They have a lot of it to give away, but they don't have infinite amounts. And if they overspend what they earn, they're going down. Okay? And they're not going down like we see it in the movies, where people start, it's like, I kind of like the movie Six Underground. I generally like Michael Bay movies. It's not happening like that. It's suddenly like everybody's like running through the streets with flags and everything. And this is the last slide we get to for today. Okay, so this is very small on my screen. I hope it's bigger for you all.
It's pretty big, yeah, but I can read it.
Okay, so this is the structure of social behavior. Okay, can you please read for figure 1.3 the 4 stages and then also what it says for the text?
Okay, so we'll start at the top where it says improved social conditions, and that goes down into frustration and into revolution. And from frustration, it goes to regression and into revolution. So it's kind of, so this is what the figure says. Macro and micro level propositions, effects of improved social conditions on potential for revolution. So this is basically saying that kind of a class consciousness is affected by, improved social conditions, whatever that means.
So this is what this diagram is there for. In the beginning of the book Foundations of Social Theories from the 70s, he kind of like actually speaks out against much of the orthodoxy of his time. In the beginning of the book, he says the idea that Protestantism linearly causes capitalism is wrong. The idea that capitalism just as a chance occurrence in Protestant countries is also wrong. The way in which he kind of like amends that is that macro level change doesn't produce, or macro levels the macro level doesn't produce another macro level. Macro level change is laundered through micro level change. One of the examples he gives, in my opinion, the best example. If you have a game board, every, let's say, permutation on the game board, or maybe you can say after 3 turns, depending on the game, is the macro level. Okay? In chess, this would be, the macro level would be kind of like configurations of the chess pieces in which there's a lot of ambiguity. So there's a lot of moves you could play. This is kind of like one macro level state, right? You now think through a lot. Then when you make a move, so for example, you target your opponent's horse, right? With your bishop, then there's usually like 2-3 turns ahead, which you can calculate, right? These are the micro level events that take place. And then once they have set in, you're like, okay, we played this variation on these moves, and you're in a new macro level, right? So a macro level is always kind of like the rule set, the general environment, like the big thing. Again, when we're talking about today's society,
Typology. It's basically a kind of typology, isn't it?
Typology of what?
So you have a situation that repeats itself with certain minor variations, and then you're onto another thing, right? So that's why, for example, you can see situations in the Book of Revelation repeat themselves, because they're just basically descriptions of certain macro level events with certain micro level variations. Am I understanding you right?
In a sense, yes. So one of the things I looked at when I saw this and when I worked through this and when I made sense of this, I was like, that in many ways is the incarnation of our Lord, right? So the first appearance he makes is as a macro level deity, right? People always forget that when God speaks in the Old Testament, that's Christ every single time, because he's the word of God, right? So he is there when God speaks. And he at first is a macro level entity, right? He gives rules. He gives the outer environment. He splits the seas. He guides Israel on the cloud through the desert. Macro level, the entire society. Then he goes down into the micro level. The first step, so these are already filled out steps, and there's specific filled out steps which we'll get to in a second. He gets down to the micro level. And the first thing in the micro level is the communication of macro level to micro level. The first thing he does is he gets into the mountain and preaches. And even as a child, he already goes into the temple and preaches, right? The first thing he does is preaching. The second, you see at the bottom, the frustration to aggression part. That is the interaction. So we have instruction from the macro level to the micro level. Then we have the interaction at the micro level, which is between the members, which again is the play that's taking place in chess, right? Like where you're like, okay, so when I pressure his queen, he has to move his queen. And then if he moves her there, then I need to move my pawn or whatever, right? So these are kind of like the immediate like hit on hit on hit on hit interactions, right? And for him, that's him being amongst the people, him healing the sick, him being betrayed, and him being put on the cross, right? That is the outcome of his interaction with the people around him. And then once that point is achieved, there's a sort of question in which the micro level now looks back at the macro level and says, hold on a second, the world looks very different now. And the macro level still hasn't changed. What's going on there? And then the micro level ascends back into the macro level, reinforces it, changes it, right? Whatever. So for Christ, that is, of course, that he dies, and after dying and in his resurrection, then opens up the heavens to humanity. And that's all humans back into heaven. And that is the new macro level he creates. And that is the macro level, let's say, that he spans out until the next time he descends from the macro level into the micro level, which of course is going to be the end times and his final incarnation. So one of the ways in which Coleman is very, let's say, necessary to read is the one that is here. And that is something that actually social theorists had known before him, and he kind of like gives reference to that. It's something that the entire society doesn't understand. And it is revolutions come about not when people have it bad. Revolutions come about when people have it good, when things just were bad and going back to good. So one of the revolutions that people think about with Ye probably is again the incredibly fast rise of the Nazi Party in Germany, right? Most people don't know what actually is the thing that enables this. The thing that enables this is that during the time of inflation, there were rent controls and you couldn't kick people out of homes. So the people who won out, the people who made it out the best, were workers, because everybody who held real estate went out of business. All the Jews in Germany, most of them, by the time the Nazis got elected, were already out of power. That is why, let's say, the Nazis believed that they were fighting against their enemies who are in power, whilst there was no real power pushing back against them. It was always going to be either Nazis or communists. The only question was who could appeal to the workers the more, because the workers had already become the strongest part in German society. And that, of course, hadn't been the case before. Before the old empire elites, which had also on the one hand had a large Jewish component, on the other hand had a large military component, on the third end had a large industrialist component. The only people who were still standing were like part of the industrialists. The military had been gutted in the peace treaties. The Jewish people had been gutted during the rise of mass inflation. That is how that sort of social change came into being. That is how they so revolutionarily took power. Most revolutions are like that. The people who make the revolutions are the people who have just gotten better. That is why the French Revolution happens under the worst person it can happen for. Because Louis XVI, in the time leading up to the revolution, was just getting to the point where he was getting life better for his people. He was just getting to the point where he was able to give them bread, right? Because, of course, the entire statement about, oh, let them eat cake is complete fabrication. Or very likely fabrication. There's no, instance at all that she might have said that. And also, again, the king and queen were actively working on getting life better for the French people at the time. They just got around to it. Things were just getting up. That's when the revolution hits. Okay? The question everybody asks is why? Why is that happening? Why are things getting better? Like, why is it when things are getting better that people revolt, right? This is the chart that answers that. The old paradigm under which the people suffer instructs into them the frustration. The frustration leads to a temporary truce amongst the impoverished people who are frustrated and want to get out. The aggression is passive for the time as everybody just scrambles to get by. But people harbor resentments. People kind of start making new allegiances. Everything starts shifting whilst times are bad. Times get good again. Everybody who wasn't able to acts again. But the old system isn't there anymore, because over the time of poverty, which the system of course didn't like because the system isn't built for it, the underlying structures had already reconstructed themselves, and bam, we go into the revolution and reset the macro system. Okay? Second part, very important. And then we get to the fat, and then we're over with this. Might become a 3-hour show after. Sorry.
Yeah.
Beliefs, conflicts of rights, new allocations of rights. What Coleman thinks about here as rights is not necessarily like the Constitution, things that are on paper, like laws in general. What he thinks about is things like social convention. If you are in a room, right, or if you are on a train track, not a train track. What are the things next to trains called? Train tracks called? The
Platform.
Platform, yes, thank you. If you're on a platform, right, and somebody next to you takes out a cigarette, do they have the right to smoke or not, right, in your presence? That is a social convention. There is no Bill of Rights that allows that. But depending on which society you're in Germany, for example, they don't have that right. They have to go to the allocated smoking zones. Okay? So, rights derive themselves from information, sometimes in very simple ways, right? If you tell everybody, oh, smoking around other people is unhealthy for them, so if you have to smoke, please go to the dedicated smoking zones, which is what happened in Germany. Then that very likely has the intended effect, right? This is why information is so important. This is why InfoWars sees itself as InfoWars, right? Because the only way to change social conventions, social rights, is through providing this information. The thing everybody obsesses about, getting back to Ye, is getting their information into the system. Everybody wants to set up a media company. Everybody wants to set up InfoWars. Everybody wants to buy up Twitter. Everybody wants to control YouTube, whatever. The effect Ye has is pure chaos. If you decide to stand with them, prepare for pure chaos. Again, the only thing that's going to be constant is going to be God. This is not an information that instructs a specific behavior or that sets up a norm. This is just an information hazard, basically. This is an information or an impact of insanity, again, that destroys a previously set allocation of rights, and thereby, again, leads into what we talked about before, fairy world, so on and so forth. Okay, so that is the destructive tendency. And then let's go to the productive tendencies, and then we're done. Okay, so basically what Ye has been doing, and I think, okay, here's the reason why many people were kind of like, oh yeah, Ye is on our side now, like everything is going to be up and up. And then like immediately the next morning they woke up with a kind of bad taste in their mouth, and it's like, if I like associate with that guy, am I going to be the laughing stock of the world, or worse, just like be like absolutely persona non grata? I mean, I actually I like contacted somebody else to co-host this with me, and they were like, oh yeah, definitely going to co-host something with you. What's it going to be about? And I was like, Yay. And they were like, you know what, I'm not doing Yay. I'm not associating with that in any way. And there is of course this fear of this destruction there. And I think there was this hope in the beginning that, well, this is the biggest superstar in the world. He obviously everybody follows him. But the things that made him a superstar wasn't that he kind of like carried his audiences everywhere. The thing that made him a superstar is that he repeatedly was able to create what Coleman calls a fad. And a fad nowadays has the connotation of being over as quickly as it started. In Coleman's case, he even calls football or American football a fad. Right, both of them actually, I think. So even like very like sports have been played for hundreds of years now, or 100 years now, are still fads. Okay, the iPhone, from his perspective, is a fad. Like not just a specific one, like the iPhone 12 or something, but like the iPhone, is a fad, right? Smartphones to a less degree, because they are like there's different things that point into that, but like the iPhone brand is a fad. Ye has so far been able to create fads. If we look at Coleman here, we can very easily find defendants are false opinion leaders. So there is this obtuseness of coolness that people often get when they're in school. And there's this sort of like independent instinct that uncool kids get in response to that. So basically, the cool kids suddenly turn up wearing whatever brand or doing whatever thing or sharing whatever video. It's completely new to the group, and sometimes they even take flack for it, and like people make fun of them for like a day or two. And then suddenly it's cool, and everybody kind of does it, and the cool kids are even cooler for being the first one to do it. And after a while, they even start making fun of other kids who later do it. And they say, oh no, you weren't even there when this started. Then the uncool kids see that, and they basically, oh, the cool kids don't give it. Like, they just like stand for themselves. They don't give a hoot, So yeah, I'm going to do the same. So they become what Coleman calls independence. Doesn't work. Okay, kind of like standing there on your own and going like, I'm right. I'm my own man. I have my own decision. Basically, everything the Libertarian Party is doesn't work. Okay, but there is such a thing as opinion leaders. This goes back into trust. This goes back into people whose trust invested in whom is a good for those who invest that trust. Right? Ye was an opinion leader when he was a superstar, and the people he knew and the people who would push him were also opinion leaders. One of the big reasons why he could launch Yeezys, why he could launch his fashion brand, why he could launch his album so well. Does he still have that? Well, people like Nick, people like Alex Jones, or specifically Nick and Alex Jones, are opinion leaders. How many more are out there that will adopt the fashion of 2022 Ye? Right? We don't know. Okay? Maybe that's it. Maybe those are the only guys. That still will lead to an event, but it's going to be a containment. Right? The value and role of opinion leaders depends on the sequence and escalation of effects. This is something important in my opinion. And somebody says, and the Sigma kids, ? Sigma kids don't exist. The guy who made them up is I don't even know who it was. I think it was Vox Day or something.
It was Vox Day, the first person I heard from. Yeah.
Yeah. Vox Day was it. And he's basically a Spurgy guy, and he basically describes alphas and betas, and I think even gammas. And he's like, oh, I'm not in the alpha group. So he makes like the very special cool alpha group for himself. And then he has the Sigma males. Sigma males don't exist in reality. It's LARP. It's kind of like Sigma males are anime characters, like harem characters. Those are Sigma males, and that's the only reality they will ever have. So the value and role of opinion leaders depends on the sequence of escalation of effects, meaning as much as if you have an instantaneous effect, an instantaneous event, such as a bank run, right? You have a very simple choice in a bank run. You either get your money out first or you're basically done, right? It's a singular choice. It's a singular event. Like as soon as you know that there might be a possibility for the bank going bankrupt, you make a calculation once, and then you act on that. No, like the role of leaders is largely diminished and largely unimportant. Nobody's going to change your mind, except maybe that they will provide you with, again, certain like extra information where they say their trusted source, I don't know, speaker for the bank, and they say, no, you guys misunderstood us. We still have 50 billion in the back, so don't worry. Like we can pay you all out if you want to. Okay. In a sequence of events, though, and this is way closer to politics, basically, opinion leaders matter heavily. Also because effects are obscured by the sequential steps it takes for them to come into place. So this is why in politics, so often people who run bad politics can still run for a very long time, just on basically, again, their prestige alone and their trust alone and their kind of like entrenchment alone. This means that the very worst for Ye, the very worst situation for Ye is right now. This is Ye at its very lowest, okay? Because this is the short game. He cannot, the only thing he can still do to make it worse, basically, is if he goes again onto the whole like, oh, it wasn't 6 million, and he basically said they make it up and maybe, I don't know, they kill babies or something, okay? That is as low as he gets, right? After that, that was the single action. Everything after that is sequential action. Everything he will try from now on will be sequential action, necessarily, not even up to his decision or not. So his star factor, which right now he just burned, will return. And we don't know in which degree it will yet. Okay. Last thing. Here's why Ye is successful. He's an incubator. An incubator has high degree of closure from the outside control, and yet a large amount of control transferred to them from the outside. So basically, they don't trust anybody, yet everybody trusts them. Who are the most successful incubators? They're all religious figures, right? Correct ones and false ones. Rasputin and John the Baptist, right? Christ technically, although in Christ's case, it's always kind of like things are always like in the absolute like infinite state. So in some senses, when you get into brass tacks like this, they don't translate as well. So a saint works like this. Again, John the Baptist works like this. Francis of Assisi works like this. Liminal figures work like this if they are able to retain their connection in liminality, so that they do not become self-destructive, right? Or so that they do not become removed from God. Which again, he is insane. He does not seem removed from God at the moment. And that is why he was able to launch again and again and again his brands. That is how he will work now, right? He will just incubate a vision which he's going to bring to America, right? It's probably not going to be a really political vision. It's probably going to be a social vision. It's probably going to be an elaboration on putting Christ first. He's incubating it right now. He has severed every tie he ever had. He is completely removed from outside of control right now. The only people of any semblance of control on him right now are Nick and Milo. And then he will re-engage society. And the question is, again, are the only people who put any stakes on him in 2 months, half a year, next year, is it only going to be Nick and Alex and Milo and like 3 other guys on the internet, or is it going to be someone else? Okay, very last thing, maybe on the right side, you see how power works. I included this part of the book for one specific reason, and that is because of people like AA who will tell you how power works, and they have no idea.
Is this the one where I have to break my neck to look at it, or is it the one?
Yes, it's the one where you have to break your neck to look at it. But it's very simple.
Interests, values. Okay, yeah. Yeah, bro, why did you have to put it in this direction? Like, come on, man.
No, look, I have a certain desire for aesthetic.
What is it with Germans and trying to kill Englishmen, man? Like, I've got like a 90-degree angle, like, to read this. I'm breaking my neck here, man.
Okay, don't worry, I can read it out. So there's a straight line in the middle, right? This goes from value to power to equilibrium distribution of control to the outcome. Of course, the thing that people are interested in is what affects the outcome. So somebody says in the chat, who's AA? If you don't know who that is, don't worry about it. StreamYard logo. So the thing hidden under the StreamYard's logo is outcome of events. I'm sorry. So the important thing this brings into is the initial distribution of control you see has an effect on value, because if you run the media, for example, if you run CNN, it's very easy for you to affect what people perceive as valuable or not. And it affects the power, so which is the power you can invest in any specific action, right? These two things give you large ability in the next step, the equilibrium distribution of control, which is kind of what you take into this bottom step here, from frustration to aggression, if you look at the left-hand side, right, into the negotiation or interaction between the members, until you get to the outcome, and then again enforcing the next macro state. So far, that is kind of like the NRX analysis of things. The thing that is completely missing from their model is what on the left side now, interests. The interests you have personally, as a group, as a faction, of course, determine the values you assign to things. They thereby affect the equilibrium distribution of control, regardless of how much power you have. And that's how the interests you hold actually also directly input the outcome of events, just from perspective, basically. This missing part explains very easily why the Christians who had no power in Rome, right, won from one half. The other half, of course, is grace. But the one half is because of their interests, because what they were interested in was peak goodness, right? It was God. And so what it made them otherworldly. It made them assign value very differently. It made them assess control very differently. And thereby it changed the outcome of events, right? Again, the grace is also an important part, but it's not an important part for this step. It's not an important part for the negotiation. Also, negotiation between two groups or two parties. The one that's more interested in the other is the one that's on the back foot, right? So this is why PUAs teach people to disregard women, basically. Because if you what this really is a caution against, and why it works, is most people who listen to PUAs suffer from something which is called anima possession. And anima possession is effectively they build up, so everybody, like every person has the opposite of the sex within them as a projection and interaction matrix for the outer world, whereby they engage the world, and they also seek them in their partner. Effectively, what that means is you create your own waifu within yourself, like the perfect wife. You want to find her in the world. You project her onto women, and then you treat those women like you treat that perfect image you create within yourself. Okay, it's a very bad behavior. It's something infantile that you have to overcome. That is part of it. It actually feeds into liminality. Yada yada yada. Specifics on most of this will be in the mainline series, because I'm just glossing through this. Okay. Reason why the PUAs give that as advice, again, is because the guys who get that advice haven't overcome the step. So they are, in a sense, possessed by the women they interact with, because they're possessed by femininity that they have within themselves. They project it on these women. They thereby fall under the possession of these women. They become now interested in a wrong way in these women. Thereby they become unable to correctly assign interest to a relationship, and that way they fall off, right? Here's the degree to which it's very bad advice, is you need to be interested in the relationship in a proper form. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Or otherwise, the best thing you can hope for is basically you get a very asymmetric relationship where you kind of navigate into it in these like Machiavellian power brokering ways. You stay on top of that like power brokering situation you have set up. And then at the end of the day, you kind of like stay in control of the relationship. That's the best thing the PUA can offer you. Okay, that's the entire thing. I hope you catch my drift here. I hope you guys understand why Yay24 is on my Telegram channel now. And
also,
why
I thought
say
I'd just add to that final point. Like, just that final point.
sure.
This is exactly why contemporary mainstream Christian evangelization has failed, because it's like needy.
Yeah, this is what Shia LaBeouf said about his conversion, right? Why he needed the TLM to convert, because TLM Catholics, they're kind of like they almost chase you out of the church, right, for not being trad enough. But the advantage they have, and it's not true, right? I love TLM Catholics. I'm not a TLM kind of guy, but I love them. And there's many great parishes and many good friends I have. But they are not needy, right? Their fight is in like being authentic, and that's what makes them immediately appealing when you get to be with them. That is, by the way, also the real reason behind the advice of be yourself, which people give you when you're dating, right? Is be yourself. Is the real reason for that advice is basically that again you're like to a degree anima possessed. You change. Part of that is you change your behavior around women. You change who you are around women. You're inauthentic, and that makes
It's a
you
lie.
yeah. And that again is why I like what Ye did, right? Even though it's an absolute disaster. Like that's what Kiddo says. Like this is an absolute disaster. Me standing here and saying like he effectively is going to. Like, I'm bullish on this. It's going to have huge effects, so on and so forth. I know I'm going to get flagged for this. I'm totally okay with this. Maybe even my YouTube channel gets taken down. I should probably start downloading my own videos. I'm okay
Just
with
keep
that.
making channels. Like, they can't ban them all.
Yeah, but I love my videos. I need to have them with me. I don't have many of the originals anymore.
Buy yourself an external hard drive, dude.
No, I have enough space on my hard drive. I just haven't downloaded them yet. Yeah, so I know that it's ridiculous to stand with him right now. But he's definitely at an absolute like he's like this is not like people who kind of are coping and like oh he's like playing 15 dimensional backgammon, you know, and he's like really like no he absolutely just like crashed his ship against the wall. I'm just confident that that's what needed to be done. Okay. And yeah, so that's what the stream was about. It was 3 hours.
It was almost, it's just over 3 hours.
Yeah, so I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope I could explain again why I'm Yay24. I'm not even American, so I'm of course not going to vote. Last thing. It wouldn't matter if he actually became president of the United States because like the real day-to-day operations are run by the cabinet anyways, right? So I would actually like if I was in the US, I would actually vote for him because
King Kanye.
I mean he is not like fit to run a country. Like if you watch my history series, like the Prussian kings ran a country where they were like really in it, right? But he crashed this plane with no survivors. So he's not able to run a country like the Prussians did it, like the Prussian kings did, where he's like basically really the guy running it, or like how some presidents did. But many presidents don't. I mean, for like Biden isn't running the country. Come on, it's his cabinet. Like he's also barely able to string a sentence together. That's not really what those presidential races are about. Okay, that's it. Bye-bye, guys.
All right. Take care.